Hello and welcome to another episode of Behind the Book. On today's episode, my guest is documentary filmmaker, author, and game writer Griffith Morgan. All right, Griff. So tell us a little bit about your background, especially as it pertains to my nerdy audience. How long have you been gaming? What was your first dip into the world of games?
It's always hard to say when you started gaming because it's like everybody played games as a kid, right? And I was kind of nerdy. And my friend Justin, when I was probably like 12 or 13, he was a little older than me. And one day he showed up with his boxed game, and it was Panzer Blitz. And I liked the art was cool because we all grew up on World War II war movies and crap like that. And so it's like, oh yeah, I want to play army with this. And it was like, my first time seeing a hex sheet, I was like, I think that one has a hex sheet, maybe not. But I was just mesmerized by it all. And he was explaining it to me, and it was just like going over my head, like attack values, defense values, terrain modifiers. I don't know. So we played a game where he basically talked and moved the pieces, and I just kind of looked. I was just like, uh, okay. So that was kind of like my first wargaming experience. And then not long after that, he got onto this computer system called the Plato Educational System. It was at the Computer Education Research Lab, which Searle, we call this Searle because it was a building. And so we'd all go scooting over to Searle to play game or to use the educational programs. But along with the educational programs, there was this really fun game called Letter D, Letter N, Letter D, and it was like a single person solo dungeon crawl. It was more like a mix. I would say it's like a mix of a dungeon board game and Dungeons and Dragons because it's not really, it's top down. It doesn't really have the same sort of experience. But this was like maybe 1975, and these old computers had like a single color plasma screen, and there was a printer that you could use. I mean, it was just like somehow because we were near a university, we were using like a multi-million-dollar computer system and sneaking in to play games. And they wouldn't let you do it except for off-peak hours, which happened like 9 at night or 10 at night or something.
Yeah.
And so one of the tricks was to try to like create your own programs and stuff
Yeah.
that maybe used a little bit less power.
Mhm.
Um, so, and then the big hit there was Empire, which was the Star Trek game, multiplayer Star Trek game, which I still play to this day. I went through a phase of like, you get into RPGs, you get a paper RPGs, then computer games came along and like in a big way, you could do it at home or on the internet. It was like, I'm going to do that. Um, and so, what else about that? Yeah. So, I kind of gone full circle, and now I just play like the oldest computer game or one of them. And I still play original Dungeons and Dragons because it's just easy and fun.
So let's talk about D&D. Was original D&D your first dip into the tabletop role-playing games?
OD&D, yeah. I mean, it was hilarious because my family moved across the country, and so I didn't have any access to my favorite thing, which was Plato system. And so I was like, I lost all my friends. I lost my favorite hobby. I was really dejected. And so I wandered into this hobby store and started talking to them, and they had games there. So I started looking at them. And I don't know, I'm inherently kind of a cheap ass. I even was back as a kid. So I got some obscure thing. I think it was called Citadel, and it was like kind of a D&D clone with maps, and you were supposed to buy miniatures and move them on the maps, and it was like DM versus player dungeon board game type game. And I didn't have any friends, so I played against myself, and I didn't have any miniatures, so I bought my first miniatures pack. And so that was kind of interesting. And then I found like it was right around Ogre had just come out, so somewhere in my house, I have a first edition ogre that
Wow.
I got, and yeah, I mean, it's worth like $500 maybe, whatever. But um, that was kind of cool, except for I didn't have any friends, so I just play ogre by myself. And And then I went in and finally it was like, maybe I should, what is this Dungeons and Dragons? And the in retrospect, I think it was a good thing, but at the time I felt ripped off because the guy in the store convinced me to buy the basic set and I should have just gotten the white box. So I got a basic set and that was kind of like another like, okay, this is really weird. Somebody took this computer game and made it into like this paper and pencil and dice game, and I was like,
Yeah.
I'm glad they did it, but they don't even acknowledge it anywhere that they like are stealing from this guy that did the computer game, right?
Yeah.
um and finally I figured out that it was backwards, but yeah, I mean that's how I got into it. It's probably, I mean, officially picking up a copy of D&D was 1977.
So talk about like your first experience playing that with a group of people. And
um
like who
First
was there? What was
experience,
the age range? Like what was the environment like?
yeah, I don't know if I even had ever played with anybody. I started a club. My first recollection is that I started a club at the library because again, nerd kid, I would go like 3 miles from my house and just hang out in the public library. I don't know why I did that, but I did that. And so the librarian was like, "Hey, you should," she'd see me because I'd bring my D&D books and just read them. And, I was just messing around with it alone. And she said, "You should start a club." And I was like, "Okay." And I didn't, she must have known other kids that would come through about my age. And so she told them there was like a D&D club starting. And so I had my first meeting and it was, I mean, it was just like all unplanned because I didn't think I was the leader, right? I was just showing up at the D&D club and some other kids showed up and I was like, "Oh, hey," and so we proceeded to play D&D with the basic set and everybody's like, "Okay." And they rolled up characters, which took 15 minutes. And they're like, "Who's going to be dungeon master?" And like, I was about 2 years older than everybody. So like it was just like, all the everybody looks at me and doesn't say anything. And I'm like, "Okay, I guess I'm the dungeon master." So I ran the Holmes dungeon, Xenopus dungeon in the back of the Holmes book. And it was my first experience just seeing how lethal and brutal the game was. And I think that my crappy TSR dice were totally loaded. So they ran into some giant rats, and the giant rats just like butchered the party. And I didn't know what to do. So I was like kind of fudging the dice. I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, it misses. Oh, it misses again." And yeah, it was funny like that. And then after that, I went home that week. I made a first level map. And back then we didn't know any better because the examples we had a staircase going down to the dungeon. So I did the classic dungeon where you go down the stairs and you go through the whole dungeon. And at the other end, there's another set of stairs and you go through the dungeon. And at the other end, it's just this like sort of, it opens up for each level and then you go to the next.
Mhm.
And I mean, it wasn't long after that I got a little bit more subtle about my dungeon design.
Where were you living at this time? Like, because I think where people lived in a lot of my discussions with gamers, I think where they lived had an impact on like how they played and the groups that they played with. Because, for example, some of my friends grew up like very kind of rural, like farm boys.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you know what I mean? Versus other people who I knew that were like in bigger cities and they had like game stores and, big things, or they were going to conventions. What was that community? What was that environment like? Like, what was that vibe
Well,
like?
I think the best way to describe it is kind of like a homogenous upper middle class place. But all of us D&Ders were kind of squirrely kids, and we lived near the mountains. I was in Boulder, Colorado back then. And so we were near the mountains, and at least two of the guys, maybe three, lived in the mountains. So they were like they only saw their friends. And when you're like 12, you can't drive, right?
Yeah.
So they mostly saw their friends at school, or if they could convince somebody to drive them somewhere. Um, they were like, I mean, they were up in just up canyons and stuff. So we're kind of a weird mixed group. And then the other thing is, I'm just like a total introvert. I've learned to be more, I don't know, friendlier maybe. Like I was just like, if I
Yeah.
was meeting you as a 14-year-old, I wouldn't even be making eye contact with you because I was just like, ah,
Yeah.
people. And so I think that our group kind of developed our own style.
Yeah.
And and then, you know, like even like um you think about Monopoly, it's like Monopoly is the ultimate home rule system. I've never played it by the rules. I remember watching the older kids play it and I was fascinated. And they had all these weird rules where they were like loaning money to each other or taking loans from the bank, and they weren't even interested in winning the game. They just wanted it to keep going because they were having fun passing the money around and stuff.
Right.
So yeah, so I don't know. I kind of treated D&D the same way. I remember reading it. I'm I remember like I'm from the generation that didn't get a diagnosis on whatever weird brain dysfunction you have. And I remember reading books and I would get lost in a page. Like I could read, if I was reading a book, I might read 2 pages in a half an hour. It was just like really hard. I loved comic books because it was easy to track
Yeah.
visually, you know. And so with D&D, what I did was I read it and then it went in my head and I just made a lot of reasoned adjustments about what the rules should be. And so I just ran it and I didn't realize I was running it wrong, playing it wrong. And that's just what I did. And yeah, that's kind of strange. But and then now I've gone back, I've read it, I've like poured over it. I've read OD&D cover to cover, like really like a really close reading several times. And I still go in and I'll read sections and be like, oh wow, this is really cool, you know.
Yeah.
And I did the same with the basic set. And one of the first things that I noticed I did wrong was like healing spells. I decided that priests should be doing things that were more of a ritual thing and a prayer type thing. And so the idea of the priest running around and like giving everybody the little love tap with healing spells, kind of like a magic spell, seemed wrong. And I never allowed it except for outside of combat, after a combat. So you do combat and all bets were off. It was just like this brutal mess. And then you get done and it was like, okay, anybody who's still alive can get a healing spell. And the priest will go over and pray over them for a turn. And then we move to the next thing. Um, yeah, it kind of created a really brutal game, but it just seemed reasoned to me, and I still play it that way. I think people get really involved in the rules and how the mechanics, like, you know, they want something that fits together like this. And my primary goal when I'm running a game is look and feel. I'm more concerned about players getting immersed into the story reality that I'm creating. Gamers talk a lot about like it has to have story, it has to have story, and it's like, well, I mean, we could do a whole show about story. I really wanted to come on and just talk to you about DMing stuff like that. But you know, setting is one of the most important things in story, and just what people are wearing and how they're acting really establishes where you are.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
that's huge.
yeah, I mean, I see that's why I don't watch like action movies that are designed like I remember seeing a sci-fi movie and one of the characters was just it was so clear he was playing himself and he was like a 1990s rapper and he just like came across as this rapper dude in the movie as his character. And I don't have a problem. I listened to some of the music, but it's like this is sci-fi reality. Why do you seem like somebody that's not in the future? You're like somebody from down the street, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No, I
yeah.
think that's very relevant. And we might touch on that stuff, but you almost naturally segued into kind of my next block of questions, which
Okay.
is, so when you first started, did you use the specific settings? Did you use Greyhawk? Did you use Blackmoor? Or did you create your own world? Or did you kind of synthesize those things? How did you do in the early days? How did you do your settings and your world building if you did?
Yeah. Well, you know, the first thing that I think that there's sort of a natural progression. The whole idea of the dungeon environment was such a novel concept back then. Like, and it handled a lot of things for you as a kid. And I think that I mean, as a 14-year-old, I wasn't as nuanced as I am now as somebody who's in his 60s. You know, so my games now are going to be a lot different. Um, and so I didn't really have I didn't I wanted to have my setting be like the books I loved. So I was obsessed with Lord of the Rings. By the time I was like 16, I'd read it through like 17 times. And I was obsessed with, I felt like there was an influence from King Arthur. So I started reading like different versions of the King Arthur story to try to see how that blended into that. Excuse me. Um, the other thing that was interesting to me was I read A Wizard of Earthsea, which at the time I didn't realize is kind of based on Taoism. And so it's sort of this fantasy story, but the main character or the reality is like, is the wizard is being taught Taoism essentially. And it's like, you like if you cast a spell, if you call like a storm from somewhere because you need it to rain here, well, the people over there, their crops are going to die. Like, there's a balance. It's not like you're making something out of nothing. There's the stuff is always there. You're taking stuff from somewhere. And so there's this polarity involved. And so I always thought that was interesting. I always wanted to do something more like a spell system, but I tried those. They don't really work for me either. Um, yeah, I mean it's like as far as setting. So that's kind of my like thinking in terms of my early self, right? Um, the and that's what caused me to ditch Dungeons and Dragons because Advanced Dungeons and Dragons came out and everything in the rules was it really locked you down. And I didn't realize that people were sort of home ruling that too. It's just that the first time I tried to run it, people started rule splaining me, and the DMG hadn't even come out. They were just rule splaining me on the player's handbook. And I was like, look, this is my world. Why are you doing that? So I ran one session and I just ditched AD&D entirely not long after that. The game that really grabbed our attention not in my club because I ditched my club, like I just abandoned them, and moved on. I found some older gamers, and one of them, my buddy Tracy Harms, was also really into Empire of the Petal Throne. And so we just started trying to figure out how to use Empire of the Petal Throne. And he had been talking, I didn't realize at the time, he was writing letters to Steve Jackson.
Oh,
Yeah. And so we both were also really into the Melee and Wizard pocket games, which are really minimal systems, but they're kind of elegant, kind of predecessor to GURPS,
okay.
maybe two generations up. And so he came up with his own system for playing an RPG using a battle mat and figures and those really simple rules so we could have pretty fast combats still, but you had some sort of impact on what was going on. The magic system was phenomenal in that game. It was just like, I don't know, just go find a copy. It's one of the coolest magic games around because it has sort of a hidden component where you cast a spell and you know what you did, but the other people don't know what you did. And so like if you see something appear on the map, is it just an image and you can touch it and it disappears? Is it an illusion and it can hurt you until you dispel it? Or is it actually a summoned thing and you can't get rid of it till you kill the wizard, right? Um, Stuff like that made it really interesting. But anyway, what's important about that is that he created his own game, and I think he might have set it in Tecumel at that time in Empire of the Petal Throne. We weren't aware of that right away, and then he kind of made it clear we were playing in Empire of the Petal Throne, but it was all using In the Labyrinth, or predecessor to In the, like his homemade predecessor to In the Labyrinth, which was the fantasy trip role playing game, and and then when In the Labyrinth came out, he actually had the first playtest credits in that book, and we played that a lot. I mean, we were just into whatever came out. I mean, I remember. I think that there's sort of a monoculture now where people only play one game. It's the popular game, and you can be part of the group if you play the popular game. We were fanatics, and we just devoured everything back then. And so it was like, I'm trying to think of. I mean, Tracy invented his game. We played that with Empire of the Petal Throne, which we just loved. Then I remember when Call of Cthulhu came out, we were like, okay, we're done playing that. We're going to play Call of Cthulhu 247. So we did that for maybe 6 months. It was just like, oh my God, this is so cool.
Yeah.
And then, Paranoia came out. It was like, we're going to play that. I mean, same thing earlier on when Traveler came out. It was like, oh my God, this is weird. Let's play this, you know. Um, and so as far as world setting stuff, like now I'm kind of running kind of a classic D&D. I had found when I was a kid, maybe 78 or 79, I found a copy of the Blackmoor first fantasy campaign. I thought it was really cool. It actually, the manuscript is not edited. It's basically Dave Arneson gave them a draft, and instead of editing it and organizing it, which an editor would do, they just published his draft. So it came out, and people were like, "Wow, Dave Arneson is kind of an idiot. This is like this rambling mess, right?" But if you read it, it's really profound. I mean, it is like what it is his notes, not all of them, but a lot of his notes for running his campaign. And his focus was really the domain level, interacting with the single character level. And so there are lists, like several places, there are lists of like the different domains, how big their armies are, what the breakdown of their armies are in troop types. And also he has trying to think what else is in there. Like he talks about the size of your domain, how many how many square miles you got, how much revenue you get out of that each year, and how much you need to spend on upkeep of troops and ships, and how much that way you got to spend. The bigger your army is, the more money you're spending, and you don't have money to get more stuff. It's kind of cool. I mean, it was like what he was doing on paper back then was essentially like a game of civilization. And so yeah, I mean that, I wanted to run Blackmoor back then. I read a lot about it. I became kind of like a Blackmoor fanatic, but there wasn't a lot out there. This is pre even the DA modules. So I remember spending a lot of time developing a Blackmoor campaign, but it never happened because I couldn't get anybody to play original D&D with me because nobody would play original D&D once AD&D came out. It was kind of stupid. But I mean, I did find one group that would get together and play goofy D&D, and it was fun. But I forgot where I'm going with all this. But as to world development, I get into really kind of sophisticated stuff. I think about sophisticated things. I've read a lot of history, and I'm kind of a hobbyist archaeologist. Read a lot about archaeology stuff. I mean, I'm just, you know, if you're inquisitive, you read about weird things all over the place, and it kind of goes into the game hopper.
Yeah, that makes a
And
lot of sense. I think a lot of people who get, who don't get into world building but want to and aren't sure where to start, I try to encourage people to always think like just take any influence that you have. It doesn't matter what genre it is. You could take ideas, setting ideas, narrative ideas from a sci-fi setting and modify them to make them part of a fantasy setting. Like any shows, any books, comics,
yeah,
all of those things could be potential world building influences. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think at the core, all of us who enjoy that incorporate our interests. Like you mentioned archaeology. I think that role-playing games have a reciprocal or synergistic effect too. So you start playing a role-playing game and you get curious about ancient languages, and then the next thing you know, you're studying, Sumerian and Babylonian myths or whatever, and then so one
yeah,
thing can also lean towards cultivating other interests, academic interests, history, archaeology, linguistics, that kind of stuff too. So yeah, I
yeah.
think that's spot on. So
Well,
let
I just wanted to interject. Like I did the same thing. I remember getting books on like hieroglyphics. I wanted to know how to make hieroglyphics, and I mean, it was a little over my head as a kid. I was like, oh my God, there's so many little symbols and stuff. But I got some basics down. Historically, though, in RPGs, there's sort of this duality. I think that people want to get into like I don't know, just arguments over what's right. And if you look at it historically, there's a real duality in like it is serious and it is kind of like it does come out of like medieval simulation wargaming. But then there's a silly side where there's also like just silly stuff that happens. And and also there's this sort of not sort of there is a full injection of different genres into the RPG milieu. Um, like Arneson is a good example because the Temple of the Frog, which is it is the first D&D module, adventure module, even though it's in a supplement. It's the first time we gamers got to see how it's done. And it's got like a whole prologue section that tells you what the setting is like, what the place is like, and then you've got all the information. Well, it's also from a time when DMs just didn't reveal their secrets. And so Dave Arneson he reveals the adventure, but he doesn't reveal the deep secret. The deep secret is the high priest of the Temple of the Frog is a guy that has come to Blackmoor from space and sort of a future setting. Blackmoor exists within, what's his name? John Snyder. John Snyder's space world of Star Probe and Star Empires. And then there was going to be a sci-fi game, Star Empire RPG, which is called Star Master, which never got published. TSR didn't want to publish it for some reason. It's a really good game too. And but you've got they were doing that thing too. Like they would have characters in each other's campaigns that were different settings, and they would bring them together in another setting. Arneson had an island that was like sort of a World War II place. I think it was Island of the Wolf, and the real Island of the Wolf, and or wolves actually. And that was kind of like a World War II weird spin-off thing. It didn't quite make sense. They didn't explain it, but they would go adventuring over there. But they would also play a war game with different factions, being the different nations of World War II over there. So there's sort of there's a real seriousness in it, and there's also a little bit of silliness, which allows for this mashup thing because it makes it more fun, And I think that with world building, you should leave yourself a little bit of space to just have fun, because if you're too strict, you create a very it's very stultifying. Like I've thought about like how do I make a game that's like the Lord of the Rings, right? And I guess there is one out there. I would never buy it. It's how many monsters do you have in Lord of the Rings? It's like you've got orcs and you've got goblins and you've got trolls, maybe, or I mean, like none of them really appear there. A big spider, one big giant spider. Gary Gygax's like his genius was to take. He had a book of like mythological creatures, and he just went through and he just turned all of them into something that could be used in D&D.
Yeah.
And so he augmented all the stuff that Arneson had already put into Blackmoor with all this other stuff, and it made it this sort of like just throw everything against the wall. It's like the spaghetti that sticks to the wall kind of idea.
Yep.
Just make up monsters, see which ones work within the context of the game, and those are going to be your monsters.
Yeah.
And and so even within like the D&D sort of the D&D world setting, which is sort of an implied, used to be an implied setting early on, and then they with AD&D they really said it's the Greyhawk setting, which is why I didn't play it, because I didn't want to play in Greyhawk. And but it was really just this like here you go, here's all this stuff, just see what happens, and see how you're like the players will not have a problem with tiny problems in the reasoning behind why something exists in your world, because it is a fantasy world, so you've got to just at some point relax and have fun.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good point. I
Sorry if
think
I'm
there's
ranting too much. I go
no,
in
no,
circles a lot.
there's some interesting stuff to delve in on, when it comes to how to integrate, different ideas into a setting. And I think there is some craft, I think, that good DMs and world builders start to develop in terms of making those things fit in a paradigm, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's something that we learned over time and trial and error, right? Because some ideas would just not work, or they'd blow up, or like you mentioned, sometimes players wouldn't want to play in a certain setting or a certain genre, or they'd tune out if it wasn't their vibe. So yeah, those are a lot of really interesting kind of topics to consider in that category. But the more
Yeah.
we talk, the more I think we're going to have to make a follow-up episode just about creating
Yeah.
setting and world building. But let me
Well, I
guide
mean,
you um,
oh,
to another topic, because you started to talk about Blackmoor and how much of an impact that had on you and how you really delved into it. So many people know you from the documentary Secrets of
Yeah.
Blackmoor, and that's a topic that I wanted to talk about on today's episode because part of of this series is just talking to people, creatives, just let's say generally, that are connected to the gaming sphere. Um, but filmmaking is, in my pocket and wheelhouse too, as a almost for almost as long as I've been playing role-playing games, I've been doing video and film. So talk a little bit about like how did you decide to do this documentary and like what went into that process? Because I mean,
Well,
documentary is different from I'm going to make a D&D movie and you could just make up whatever you want. A documentary requires a tremendous amount of research, right? So like how did this start and when did it start?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of both Chris and I, like, I can't talk about the documentary without talking about Chris. And so Chris and I had come up with, I mean, I'd come up with the idea for it, and we were kind of trying to develop a social media company. And the whole premise was completely different. I don't see anything out there yet. I've been thinking of, I wish I could just ditch all the gaming stuff and just go hide and build my social media project because it's really different and more fun. But my whole thing is just with Chris was just like we were making movies. We wanted to make movies. I've always wanted to make movies. I write screenplays. Most of them end up being sci-fi. I don't know why. It's just like I write a lot of sci-fi screenplays, but nobody's going to back your weird sci-fi film, so they sit in a drawer. But I don't know. It was just an accident. I had come back to gaming and was playing D&D with Chris's brother and our buddy Bob and their group, and they had a campaign that had been going since '79. Timnath, and so they had started kind of not long after I did, and they would just go through each edition of D&D and just change. It was like, I mean, that's where it like, look and feel. They had their world, so they just stayed with their world's look and feel, and they just kept using different rules to do it, and they were able to continue like that. Um, so it's just an accident. I tried different things, tried Pathfinder, didn't like it, and so I went back to OD&D. I made my own game. I made a setting that was a mashup of Empire of the Petal Throne. So it was like a space station, a recreational space station over Tecumel. So I used things from that as ideas. And then it had been somehow altered, sort of like in Metamorphosis Alpha, the spaceship gets altered. There's this radiation, which is really just magic. And see, another implied thing, he never says the radiation is magic. But if you understand the radiation is just a magical cloud they go through, then all the mutants and stuff happening right away makes sense. It's just magic. And and then using D&D Pathfinder, I thought was interesting because it had the D20 system. So I just stripped it down to the D20, kind of like a more like a THACO type system for everything. I tried playing that system, and it was fun because the first session I just described, I had this thing that was kind of like a guided hypnosis session. So I had my players sitting with their eyes closed, and I described how they're waking up and they can see light coming through their eyelids, and there's a light that's glowing, and they wake up, and they open their eyes and they realize that they're in these opaque balls, that they're trapped in them, and they're all together, but they're on this like flat dish trapped in these balls. And so they had to figure out how to roll the balls over the lip of the dish onto the spikes that were on the outside. Well, what they didn't realize was the reason they don't remember, because I said you have no memory of who you were. You are like an empty container as you wake up, is because they were sort of like giant spiders, or they were giant spiders, or kind of a cross between a Hogaya and giant spiders. Anyway, so they didn't know, so they're coming into this setting not knowing what anything is. And it's fun to watch them have to try to not metagame because during part of the adventure, one guy climbed up the mountains because they're spiders. They can just climb up the mountains and they're not that big. and he gets to the sky and he realizes the sky is flat and it's just like a big LED panel that goes up over everything. And so he's like, I'm watching Bob be like, well, this is weird. I can't say what it is, but the sky is flat. And that's a weird switch. But and so then they went exploring. They found it like a chasm, and they're seeing they look in the chasm and they can see that this opening is like miles deep, and there's a landscape below. So now they sort of realize they're on something that has multiple levels and is some sort of enclosed thing. And they're having the meta game, which is fun because they're like, I know what that is, but I can't say what it is, and I have to pretend like I'm not on a spaceship because I'm whatever I am. Um, so I kind of was doing that kind of stuff. I forgot where I was going with this. Oh yeah, you want to know about the movie? See, the movie is like this. It's all connected. It's all
Yeah.
this big web. Um, so I eventually just realized that my mechanics weren't working. D20 system is garbage. I won't play it. Um, I was like, the only thing that works for me is original Dungeons Dragons. The rules are crap, but they work. If you don't ask questions about why or whatever, the balance within the game system is perfection, you know. And so Arneson and Gygax created a system that's like it's well balanced between simulationism of like are there not really simulationism but a results based like did my dying roll give me a result that seems realistic and just being like sort of meaningless drivel. It's somewhere like right in the middle. I was just going through the original D&D system, and I was examining the combat system, and there's a little passage where in OD&D, Gary Gygax says I don't remember what exactly it is, but I mean, I got a book here. Where's my book? I will tell you exactly what he says very quickly. But he basically talks about how it's a minimalist system. The idea behind original Dungeons and Dragons is not to have a super detailed, crunchy simulationist system. Everything is, he uses the word subsumed, which I think is really delightful because I love that word. Um, yeah, it's just talking about the combat, the alternative combat system. And he just says the system is based upon the defensive and offensive capabilities of the combatants. Such things as speed, ferocity, and weaponry of the monster attacking are subsumed in the matrices. And so what he's saying is like, we're just going to average these things out mathematically. Over the long haul, like a +1 is huge. You do 50 die rolls with a +1, and that's really huge. Individual combat wise, you're not going to see a big difference on the die throws. You might not be aware of it.
I see the connection because you having gone back into games and kind of being frustrated with game systems that just weren't working for you, you rediscovered OD&D, and in rediscovering OD&D, that kind of led you back to the origins and Arneson. So was it like at that point, was it a curiosity? Were you curious
No, it's
about?
just an accident. I went online. See, I got into OD&D. I went online. I found an original Dungeons and Dragons group on Facebook, and so it just happened to be Gary Gygax's birthday.
Yeah,
I was out of the loop on all the gamer drama and all the stupid crap.
right.
I didn't follow any of it for 20 years. Sometimes I'd get together with friends and we play other games, but I just didn't care about all the D&D stupid stuff. And it was Gary Gygax's birthday. Everybody's like, yay, Gary Gygax. And I was like, well, that's great. Gary Gygax was an important person. But I had read First Fantasy Campaign and I had read interviews with Arneson back in the day, like in 79. And so I just typed in a little message like, yes, but what about Dave Arneson? Because they were all like, Gary Gygax is God. Oh, Saint
Yeah.
Gygax. And I think that's stupid. Like I've met so many famous people and I'm like, it's kind of, there's a weird, like really famous people are just regular people. They like to go swimming and hang out with their friends and do regular things.
Yeah.
And so the mythologizing and what is it, hagionymy or so, I forgot how you pronounce the word, like the
Yeah.
stories of the saints, with Gary Gygax, I just think is idiotic. And I would say the same thing about Arneson, and he would say the same thing too. Um, And so with that one little comment, I created a firestorm. It was literally like somebody's got a match, and I show up with a can of gasoline, and I had all the, anybody involved in game history, D&D game history, was in there calling me bad things. Anyone who was a former TSR employee that was around, Jim Ward was basically telling me the F word and calling me a other things like that. I mean, he wasn't pulling any punches.
Right.
The brutality of the attack was like fascinating. It's like, I'm just on the internet. This is what's on the screen. That mind world is not real. So I'm like, that's weird. And so this guy with this weird name starts talking to me, and he says, no, 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 you're right. And he starts sending me links to things. And so I'm pretty sure I started taking those links, and they would be like, you're a whatever. And I'd be like, yeah, but what about this article? And I'd post the link that the person was sending me. So a few days of being like a proxy for somebody in a giant internet war. And I was like, this is weird. Who's this person that's talking to me? I don't know who they are. So I was like, why are you using me as a proxy? Like this is kind of weird. And he's like, oh, I can't get in there. They all know who I am. They would just like, they'd jump on me. They'd probably get me banned from the group. It's just not worth it for me to be in there. Um, and it was Kevin McCall, who used to be Dave Arneson's webmaster. So he had access to a lot of things that Dave had given him. And we started a little group. We were just talking with some of the people who ran at the time. It was Raphael and Havard were kind of the lead guys on the Blackmoor forum to come back in, which is kind of dead now. I almost feel like I should just go there instead of my other social media, because it's just Blackmoor 247, and that's my thing. Yeah, we started talking, and at some point, Kevin revealed that Dave Arneson had tried to do a documentary, and there was like a whole archive of footage that had been shot. And he hired this guy to do the interviews. Eventually, we got in contact with the guy, and he let us look at the footage. We signed all these like really binding agreements. And I watched the footage, and technically it was good, but the interviews were like, I was like, why aren't you following up on that? Like people go into interviews with like their 10 question list, and it's like you ask the first question and you get an answer, but that, as an interviewer, your job is to go like, wait a minute, I hadn't even thought of that. Can we talk? And so you're like spinning out, and you're going off, in different directions.
Right.
And so yeah, so I was like, I watched that footage. It was terrible. Sorry, I don't mean to insult the filmmaker. I mean, the footage looks great. It sounds great.
Right.
Somebody else should have been the
But
interviewer.
content wise, it wasn't there.
Yeah, it was kind of like he would just turn on the camera and ask a question, like a question, and like there are awkward moments where he just asks a question, and the people are just sitting there looking at the camera because they don't really know how to answer the question, or what, they don't really know where they're going, and it's just strange. The goal of that movie, also direction wise, was that Dave Arneson wanted to archive the the origins of the game industry, and so it wasn't really like a me thing. It was like, you go out and interview all these people. So Dave Arneson refused to be involved. He just wanted to get the footage, see what was there, and make a film, which is really like the true documentary style. You get the footage, you watch it, it speaks to you, and it tells you how it wants what it is and how it needs to be organized. You kind of don't impose your own will on it. Chris and I always talk about that. If we'd gone to the Twin Cities and been like, we sit down with somebody like, so who invented D&D? And it's like, oh, it was Gary Gygax. Dave Arneson didn't do anything. Would have been like, oh, okay, I guess we're going to do a movie on Gary Gygax, but we did all the interviews, and the deeper we dug, the more it was like we hit a vein in our mind, and we were just following that trace of gold. And every time we hit something else, we got something else. And even the Blackmoor bunch were super mysterious. They Nobody said like David Wesley has this game and it does this. Nobody said Dwayne had his own role playing game before D&D set in the Wild West. It was just like, oh, you should talk to this guy because he did something cool. I'm like, okay. Um, if you, yeah, talk to Rockford, find out what his secret character is. It's like, okay. Nobody said, oh yeah, Rockford was the high priest of the Temple of the Frog. And, but he wasn't really from Blackmoor. He's from space. Like, and his like blaster weapon was really a phaser, and like all this stuff. Nobody said that. They were just like, oh yeah, go over there and talk to that guy, see what happens. And then there's the whole people are very protective of the Blackmoor legacy within the group, and if you're not in the group, you're not aware of it. But like Malia is kind of like, I don't know. It's sort of like if you want to talk to Malia, you've got to prove that you're like somebody that she would should waste her time on.
So to be clear, a couple names for those who don't know. When you say Chris, you were talking about your
Chris
co-director.
Graves,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
and you and Chris were the producers behind this.
yeah, yeah,
And then
yeah. Kind of
when you
producers,
talk about Malia,
directors,
that's Dave Arneson's daughter.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And
So
Rockford is Steve Rockford,
yeah,
and he
so
he
you
runs like a big LGBTQ magazine in the Twin Cities.
so
He's kind of
you guys, came up with this plan, right? And you start diving. I mean, did you reach out to these people to start setting up interviews? You got into production, you're doing interviews.
well. Kevin was had Dave Arneson's personal phone list, which was basically just an Excel spreadsheet. So I had all the personal phone numbers of all the people in the game industry from, you know, well up into the 90s when
Right.
he passed away. Um, but they were all like his connections back into time. So I would just do cold calls, call people. I'm making a documentary, and it was difficult because most people either they were right involved in all the TSR drama between Gygax and Arneson, and so they've already taken sides, and which is hilarious because a lot of them showed up at TSR after Arneson was gone. So it's sort of like it was just the company culture to hate Dave Arneson, which is hilarious because it's like, well, without Dave Arneson, none of you would be making a living. So just go in a corner and think about the fact that your whole career is based on ideas he had and shared with Gygax. But yeah, so I would just call people, that were kind of Arneson allies and talk to them. And it was kind of tragic because a lot of them had passed away. I talked to everybody's so connected. They don't like behind the scenes, everybody's so connected. Like the Blackmoor bunch are a bunch of game designers, but in that game designer group was Dan Nicholson, who was, I think his training was like IBM training. And so like he was the first person to bring a computer to um, what at the time was Gen Con, I guess. And he brought a mini computer in, like he had to roll it in on a pallet. And so they did like really primitive game stuff on a mini computer.
So let
Um,
me ask you a question because in watching the documentary, which I bought it and then I probably watched it 6 times. Um, a lot a lot more, I think, than I thought originally, of the big picture here involves understanding David Wesley and Braunstein and how that connected and maybe had connections with Arneson as Arneson and the rest of the Blackmoor bunch were developing stuff. Like,
yeah.
was that intentional or was that what you were talking about where you started the interviews and then you kind of stumbled onto these follow-up questions that led you down that path?
Well, it's interesting because Dave Arneson always said that he got his ideas from West, like what they were doing within the Napoleonic campaigns.
Yeah.
And he was very, very open about that. I think TSR liked to suppress that. They never wanted to talk about Wesley. And so you never hear about Wesley. I think that it's really complicated. I don't feel like I completed the last portion of the movie where I start to transition between the story of Brownstein and the story of Blackmoor, partly because the Blackmoor story is still so just ephemeral and hard to nail down. And but I think there are fundamental differences. I think the big thing that people don't understand in the movie that I sort of say it in the I say like I say that Dave Arneson takes everybody in a totally different direction. And people don't understand what that means because it's hard to outline what a Dave Arneson style RPG is. But Wesley is running a game that is on one level similar, but on so many other levels, a completely different trajectory. And so my feeling on it is that you have a branching in the road because you have many ways that you can run a role playing game. And so one direction is the David Wesley approach. And so in the David Wesley approach, just as an example of how they are different, once you know who you are, once you know what the stage is, the setting, as I was talking earlier, setting and flavor, once you know that, you know sort of the guidelines of how to operate within this world, right? And the Brownsteins, it rhymes with Frankenstein, by the way, Brownstein, or a mug, it's a Brownstein. Wesley doesn't interfere with gameplay at all, right? Because the whole focus in a Brownstein is to interact with the other players. And generally speaking, there's also like a board, which is really restrictive in Brownstein, which is still kind of within kind of the traditional board game concept. And Rob Kuntz talks about this a lot, and I think people don't understand what Rob is saying. It's like Arneson is the one who creates the game engine for playing a game that just breaks all the rules. And what he does is he takes informal play methods from like make believe, right? Which Wesley is using too, but he takes those and he imposes, he sort of opens it up because there are no limits. Man, I hope I'm not sounding too academic and nerdy.
No,
But
I love it, and I think the people who will tune into this are going to get a lot of insights into this because
okay,
this is kind of at the root. The documentary portion is at the root of what I want to talk to you about next, which is the books. And
okay. Well,
so
here,
yeah,
let me get to. So Wesley's doing a thing where the referee does not control reality. The referee tells you what the reality is, and off you go, and you can do whatever you want. But everything you do is related to other players. You're talking to other players. You're interacting. There are sort of NPCs, but really they're just there as I want to go to a store and buy some stuff. And as a referee, Wesley curtails any role playing there. He's just like, okay, you go in the store. The storekeeper says if you want to buy a hand grenade, it's $30 or whatever you're buying, you know. And it's like, okay, I got $60. I'm going to get two. End of NPC encounter, right?
right.
Because the whole Wesley wants to guide the players together so that they're having interactions in groups around the room and creating this really dynamic, fluid sort of setup. Arneson does the reverse. He creates a dungeon master where you can't play without the dungeon master because the dungeon master is there to control reality. You know, even role playing is such a stupid term, it's a misnomer. I hate using it. And so he's taking informal play structure, and by informal, I mean stuff that children do without any rules. And make believe is like a fundamental thing that's like in our heads. Like you get a couple of 4 year olds together, and it's like, let's pretend that, you know, this shoe is a boat, and I'm going to put my doll in it, and I'm sailing on the sea, which is just the living room floor, you know, and then there's a monster, and there's the cat over there, right? Or whatever. That's child's play. The problem, or it's not a problem, it's great if you just want to do that. And a lot of people do like sort of LARP games like that are just like free form, like make believe. That's fine. I'm not going to criticize you. But Arneson creates the system where you do that, but then you merge it with mechanics and you merge it with a, a referee that's establishing the game reality. And so when the dungeon as an example, it's like you come down some stairs, putting visual images, you know, like as you come down the stairs, you can see like, you know, it's really mossy here. There's some sort of like stringy algae falling, like coming down from the roof above you. There are little spiders scurrying around. I mean, you know, the DMs always do this at the beginning, especially. It's like we're going to establish feeling, you know, like this is an old place. As you walk down, dust comes out from between the rocks or something. Like maybe the masonry isn't stable, you know. Um, so you're doing that. That's a make believe aspect, but you're at that make believe is establishing the reality of what you're interacting with, and so Now you're interacting with the environment. And so you do these things where you'll, like, okay, well, what's down here? Well, there's a door and it's dark. What do you want to do? And it's like, we'll light a torch so we have a light. And then we're going to hang out a little bit back so we're not noisy and don't reveal ourselves. But one of us is going to go up and put their ear up against the door and see if they can hear anything coming from the other side. Okay. And so he's created the system where you have this make believe aspect, which is it's not totally free form, but because the dungeon master controls it, because there is a map rule and the dungeon master has a map. And so as you go down through the map, the dungeon master says, well, you can't go over there because it's solid rock, but there's a passage going this way. You can go that way, and um, so you have this system where the glue is make believe everything, and what you say is what you do, and sometimes what you do requires something to not. It's like if you say, I'm going to pick up my coffee and take a sip, right? The dungeon master isn't going to say, I need you to roll a d20 against your intelligence to see if you can do that. It's like, okay, people can pick up coffee cups. I'm really breaking this down to fundamentals. So it might take me a couple minutes here, but then you get situations where you need to resolve, like, the door's stuck and what do you want to do to open the door? It's like, well, we're gonna have two fighters like throw their shoulders into it and try to force it open. And so then in the old game, it was like, okay, each of your fighters roll a d6, and if you get a one or a two on either of those, you open the door, right? And so you create. Um, it's like the original. Like if you talk about, well, I won't go into that because Kriegspiel is a whole other thing. But there's a whole like debate in schools of thought between a deterministic game, like chess is deterministic. I move my piece onto the square with the other piece, and that means I capture the piece. So that's deterministic. Or having a game that isn't deterministic, where you have like variability, and it's like you have charts with like that have probabilities and likelihoods, and you roll dice to see what the result is of when your pieces come together. And so you also have an environment where you have a probabilistic sort of chart. Like, if later they had charts where if you were stronger, you got a better die roll on the d6 to open the door, and it's funny because they never got into the doors. And I, like, if a door is hard to open, I'll be like, you got to roll a d8. I'm kind of an evil DM because the door gets a probabilistic bonus too, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, that's kind of I don't know if I covered everything, but really that's the difference. Is Arneson goes into this realm where the referee is creating this reality and you're interacting with that reality. If I tell you that you come into a room and there's a table there, and you're standing in the doorway, and I say, what do you want to do? And it's like, well, if there's nothing threatening around, I'm going to walk to the middle of the room and look and see what's on the table. And then I might say, like, oh, there's a bowl on the table. It's like, okay, I pick up the bowl. Like, you literally do what you say. And so you're
Right.
in kind of, and that's kind of like, people are really, I don't know, or I do know, I kind of despise the way that people have merged story idea into like story screenplay and story terminology into role playing, because role playing, as Robin Schick stated, is a new art form, and it's kind of a performance art, and it's sort of a thing until it to itself. And when I see somebody talking about like story beats in their RPG, I'm like, are you playing an RPG or writing a screenplay? Because I'm like, you know I'm a professional at doing these things. I write screenplays, I make movies, I write stories, and I don't use that crap terminology in my role playing games. So I don't understand it either. It's like, the and also the see, I'm getting into my, like, I get really like rah about role playing games sometimes. And it's not like do whatever you want. I'm not going to come knocking on your door with the game police, the RPG police backing me up and kick in your door because you're doing it wrong. But I do have some really strong opinions about how these games work. And so I get kind of enraged because I'm like, well, I've been really studying this stuff and I think this is how it works. And I can back it up with all this information.
Just to close up on the documentary. So give us a timeline? How long in total did it take before, from start to finished product?
6.5 years.
Okay, 6.5 years. And what did the completion of that documentary mean to you, both personally and professionally?
Well, I think that, as any, like, I think artists, when you make your sort of like, I mean, it's not intentionally my great masterwork, but it has become it just because it's kind of the most significant thing I've done. So you have expectations as an artist, I think, when you make something that's like kind of more important. I mean, I've done seen things that, 100,000 people have seen, but they don't know that I made it, because it was like some commercial or something. Like I did this video for like the Department of Transportation. They sent out DVD copies to like every grade school in America. Millions of people saw the video I produced and edited. Nobody knows who I am,
Yeah.
and I got paid scale.
Yeah.
So, but so it's like Secrets of Blackmoor is kind of like mine and Chris's baby. I think it's different for Chris because he already had a lot of experience with film. Like when he was in high school, he was roommates with Trey Parker. And so for like I think it was a history class, they were both studying film. And Chris basically taught Trey Parker how to do animation. And they did this like animated cartoon called World History. So
Yeah.
like the South Park look is actually what Chris was doing as a kid that he did later in college with Trey Parker. But and he was trying to imitate what's his name, the guy from Terry Gilliam. So there's
Yeah.
a connection between like Terry Gilliam animation, Chris Graves, and like the South Park look.
Yeah.
Um, and that's not to take away from, it's just like everything is connected. It's like
Yeah.
here you go, like off you go, have fun. So I think, but Chris has already sort of achieved a certain degree of success with that, and then he did other things which were actually more successful in other ways. Um, and so for me personally, I think that the movie, I just really wanted it to have an impact on the gaming community and just like people, for people to like, I mean, I wanted people to appreciate what the Blackmoor as bunch as a whole really did for gaming. Like it's really hard to pin down who did what, like you.
Has anyone ever approached you and proposed that there's a similar or maybe an analogous relationship between Gygax and Arneson and Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak? Has
I think
anybody
that's
ever
like
made
really blatantly obvious,
right?
you
Like I
know.
and that I watched that documentary several times and I just thought to
Tesla,
me,
Edison.
yeah, to me what you guys did was you kind of shared some important history for the gamers who really care so that people know. And I don't, you know what, I don't think that your documentary diminishes Gygax. I don't think it's a hit job on Gygax. I think what it is just showing the whole picture because a lot of people didn't know that whole picture and they just knew the name Gygax and they knew TSR post Arneson, but they didn't really know the big picture. And as a person who appreciates history, and a lot of other people do, I think what you guys did was magnificent because it showed that history, that broader history. It made those connections, like you said, how everything's connected.
I don't know. I won't say anything bad about Gygax because I like to read what he says about D&D, like
Yeah,
that passage about all the systems being subsumed, like
right.
all the details. But there's a lot of crap, I think it's good to set. I don't know if did Wozniak and Jobs have a falling out?
I think they did, and then maybe they, I don't know. I think it
They got
smoothed
over
over
it.
in the end. I I,
I
I think
think.
Wozniak got a sizable amount of money that made him uh, be able to digest what happened later.
Well, I mean, at a certain point, you don't like if you're an inventor and a creator, you just move on to the next thing. People talk about like, oh, Arneson wasn't doing anything when he was at TSR, and that's why they fired him, right? And it's like I've seen entire manuscripts for games that he made that were supposed to get published. Like there was a follow up to D Guts, and it's like a manuscript like this, right? And it's got a foreword written by Gary Gygax. Gygax refused for some reason; it just never got into the publishing hopper, and they just didn't publish the follow up to Gygax. So Ships of the Line disappeared, just like all the games that came out of the Twin Cities that they just like didn't mutant and I just think of mutant and Star Master RPG. Like these games just didn't get published because maybe because they came from the Twin Cities and the Lake Geneva guys didn't like the Twin Cities people anymore or something. But when you, I mean, I don't know. It's just it's weird dynamics. I mean, I hate to say negative things about people like that because I know that I've been kind of a douchebag in my life because I
Well,
was
yeah,
young and inexperienced, right? And so later in my life, I'm like, huh, I was kind of a jerk to that person. I was just feeling insecure and I wanted to put them in their place to make myself feel good, you know. But I shouldn't have done that because I was kind of a jerk, you know. And you just move on. You grow up, you move on. So Wozniak was probably like, I got other stuff to do, you
yeah,
know. They gave me some money, but I got other stuff to do, you
yeah.
know.
So
Um,
speaking of moving on, you've been involved in some books. Let's talk
yeah.
about that. So what books have you written or contributed to?
I wrote, well, the movie is really the biggest thing because writing a movie is really hard. And I'd never written a documentary before, so I was doing something I didn't know how to do. I wrote, I thought I had a copy of, um,
Lost Dungeons of Tonisberg.
yeah, I thought I had a copy of Thomas Board around here. Yeah, I got,
I have a
okay,
copy.
there we go. There we go. So when we were making the movie, we found an old dungeon. It's mentioned, like Tonisborg is mentioned in First Fantasy Campaign by Dave Arneson in '77. And so it became this mythic thing where gamers who were really into Blackmoor were like Blackmoor is the ultimate. It's a town over a multi-level mega dungeon. And so, you know, we know kind of about Blackmoor. And so then there was this whispered talk about this Tonisborg dungeon, which was supposed to be a mega dungeon. Turns out it's 10 levels deep. And it's like in the classic style. And so when we were making the movie, we were interviewing McGarry. I mean, it's actually on camera in one of the interviews. I was saving that chunk for another movie because we were going to do a follow up, but then the movie bombed. So it was like, screw that. Let's make game books, you know? And so McGarry was just like, yeah, I have these old dungeon maps. I don't know what they are. Let me go get them. And he disappears off into his basement. So I'm sitting there with Wesley and Ross, and we're just chatting away. And McGarry shows up with these maps, and we're like, what the heck is this? You know? And as somebody who's like a huge fan of Arneson stuff, um, I just looked at that and I was like, this has to be an Arneson dungeon because it just all the angled hallways and weird shaped stuff. That's Blackmoor. Okay. And so it turned out McGarry suggested, I think even in that interview, he suggested that it might be a copy of Tonisborg. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird. But I didn't know the significance at the time. People don't understand how much information you load into your head to try to, like, everything that you see in the movie, there's at least 10 times that didn't get into the movie
Right.
because you're just like doing a deep dive. Like, if I was in a university, I would have a PhD right now because that movie is like a PhD in history of D&D, you know. Um, and so Dan, I didn't think to send it to Dan right away. So I went and did the interview with Greg Venson. And even there, I was like, we think we might have found your dungeon because Greg assumed it was lost. And I'm going off. I know I just go on these long tangents. It's this old dungeon that was lost for 35 years and it's cool as hell. Um, so finally, I was just so overloaded that I never thought to like just ask, like show it to you know, you can print it out and show it to Greg Svensson. He'll tell you what he thinks. Well, Dan was like, why don't I just mail it to Greg and ask him what he thinks of this? So he mailed all the scans of it to Greg. And so it's like really like I just tell the story because it's like, this is how convoluted research is, right? You have the stuff, you have the person that can tell you what the stuff is, but you don't make the connection to do the talking. And yeah, that's a redone map. The originals are further in toward the front. Um, if you can find maybe that level as the original, but Dan emailed it to him, and it was like, I mean, it was like just such a no-brainer. I'm just like, I'm so stupid. I should have just done it. So Dan gets that one. Um, yeah, that's like an old dungeon that's been Xeroxed, so you lose the grid, but it's all there.
Yeah,
And then
I
it's
could
been,
see. I mean, you could literally see the folds in the paper too. It's really cool that you guys included that.
yeah, I don't know if that edition has color pages or not. The hardbounds have a color print, and so they're really beautiful.
Yeah.
Anyway, like Dan verified, he sent it to Greg, and Greg was like, "Yeah, that's my handwriting. That's my dungeon." And so we got to like look into this. I mean, it's if you're not a historian, you're not going to understand how significant it is. Like, there's so much stuff that's just like mind blowing in there, as far as like early dungeon RPG dungeon design, like the shapes. We asked Greg, why is it shaped like that? And he said, it's all randomly generated. And we
Oh
were like,
wow.
what are you talking about? Because, we thought that came out in the DMG, right? Or in Dragon Magazine. And it's like, oh, yeah, Greg or Dave had a random generation system he created. It was just in his head. And so when I got a copy of D&D, he brought me a copy of D&D, a pre-release copy, like just a printout or whatever it was
Yeah.
at the time. Um, he explained to me how to make a dungeon using dice, and I just sat down with some paper and rolled dice and randomly generated all these passages and rooms and stuff.
Wow. Where is that system now?
Well, I was in Dave's head. It's
Yeah,
gone,
but he never put it down. Wow.
Yeah. What I would like to do is just take the system. I mean, you could probably count the probabilities of what if you start in the middle and go out, you can count the probabilities at least for the first levels, right?
Yeah.
Second levels might be kind of a weird thing where they were kind of like cross, like it would work a little bit here, work a little bit there. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's probably D6 based on the probabilities you get on 2D6, you know. Um, and so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's astounding. The other stuff that's astounding that you find in there that predates other events are like the boss monster at the bottom of the dungeon. That boss monster I always assumed came from computer games because D&D dungeons didn't really they weren't designed as products originally.
Right.
And so you would just make a dungeon and there'd be stuff in there and there would be like area bosses, but they were kind of like personas and you didn't necessarily expect to kill the area boss either. It was like just somebody you fought against their minions to try to get what you wanted. Excuse me. I'm having allergies like you wouldn't believe. So anyway, it has that. The doors, if you hold it up, the original up, the doors are what I call the ping pong paddle,
Yeah.
the flippy paddle. And so those match what Arneson drew in First Fantasy Campaign. I think they're like that. And in Temple of the Frog, those are Arneson's drawings they reproduce there. And they have the little pinball flipper doors, which is a really, like TSR doors don't indicate which way they go. And I always pondered that, like, how do you have a door that goes both ways? And how does that impact when you play the game? What happens? Because so much combat happens around doors and stuff.
Right.
Um, and so I've integrated that sort of back into played differently when I was a kid. I've integrated the harness and stuff into my game. And I always let people know which way the door goes because it affects how they interact with it. What else is in there? Um, there's an artifact in there that is mentioned in original Dungeons and Dragons. There's three of them: the three crowns of power, and so those are mentioned in original D&D. But I don't know if the edition Greg would have seen mentions that. So maybe those are based on like maybe Arneson was talking to Rob Kuntz and he's like, oh yeah, Greg's putting these crowns of power in his as these artifacts in his dungeon, right? And so indirectly, this idea that Greg has ends up in D&D. You go through it. I mean, at every point, there's just something interesting in there, and it's just a beautiful example of the old school style. I hate to call it old school. It's just an early dungeon, and it's an example of the minimalist style of early play where you would make notations on the map if you needed to. There are some things that are marked on the map So they're always there, like some prison bars are just a series of dots in a row. There's an X where there's like a suit of armor in the hallway. Um, Stuff like that that we used to do. And then the room description might say what the room is used for. And that's just supposed to evoke what the DM describes when you get there. So like, this is the like wizard's laboratory. And it's like that's all you get. That and then whatever's in there, if it's the wizard or maybe something guarding it, and then what the treasure is. And we didn't really, I mean, like, yeah. And so you've got to, when the players come in, on the map, it's just like a square room, but the referee has got to go like, okay, what do I tell them is in here that makes them understand that they are in a wizard's laboratory without saying, you've entered the wizard's laboratory. It's like you come
Right.
in the door and you see like tables all around. There seem to be like burners with like glass containers bubbling over them. And there's all kinds of happening, some open, some closed. Some are even tipped over, just jars and things full of like weird concoctions and herbs and stuff. It smells
Let
strange.
me interject and read. So just so people understand, for each location on the map, there's a very short, like you said, a very short description, which is meant to kind of give the DM some sense of how to evoke this location, right? So
Yeah.
for the laboratory, it says beakers, boxes, jars, hanging crystals, and skeletal body parts litter several of the workbenches in this laboratory. Deeply engaged in some research, a black-robed enchanter stands at one of the benches. And that's more than enough to illustrate kind of the setting, right? And that is
But that would be like for a product. Yeah, go ahead.
right. And then, but then like, some of the other locations are really kind of simplistic that, and I think the nice thing about that is
But
that it allows the
what
DM.
location is that you're looking at?
So this was location 1035 laboratory.
Okay, go to 1035 on the original map sheet. It's the last, it's like the list after it's the list of encounters after the level 10 map in the original section.
It has some treasure listed. I mean, that's about it.
It doesn't, yeah, it's just, it's
It,
like,
it's like level 8 MU, which is magic user, I'm assuming.
yeah,
Ring of Delusion,
yeah.
and then some silver pieces on statues. Yeah, like it's super minimalistic.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like people think they need to like, I think that's kind of what's really harmed the hobby, at least as far as Dungeons and Dragons is concerned, is that consumers, especially young consumers who they don't have any other guidance on what direction to take. They're seeing all the like heavily developed consumer product, which is great if you want a consumer product. And they're thinking that as a DM, they have to sit down and put in like 30 hours creating like a half an hour on a dungeon description.
Right.
And it's like, no, we didn't do that. We just like, if there's tables in there, you might put a mark on the map where the tables are. You know what that mark is because you remember when you drew it what it was supposed to be. And
Right.
you write Wizard's Laboratory and you just describe the character. The stuff, the only things you need to list are the things that have value to the players. And the players are probably going to blow through that room after wasting the wizard in like 4 rounds, which might be like 15 minutes, especially in OD or in speed play like OD&D, original
Right.
D&D. And they're going to be off to something else. You
Yep.
don't, why would you spend a half an hour writing up an encounter that your players are just going to go in there and fireball and move on to the next thing, right?
I'm going
And
to
and
totally clip what you just said because I think that's a crucial morsel of wisdom that newer DMs need to know. Like that idea that like why would you have this elaborate, 3 paragraph description when they're probably going to just go in and, kill, slay, smash, steal the important treasure and move on.
yeah.
I,
Well, and
I
it's
think that's
it's
valuable.
I mean, the company has seen what players gravitate towards based on like the different generations, like different things, whatever. I'm not going to get into all that, you know, mine is better, you
Yeah.
suck, you know. But if you want like sort of an immersive experience, not sort of, I always say sort of, I need to stop doing that. if you want an immersive experience in an RPG game and you want to get a lot of stuff done, if you focus less on your character and you have easy to roll up characters, it takes 10 minutes max. And your dungeon can like, I don't know, I could make a dungeon in 15 minutes if I needed to. And it would be enough dungeon that probably would last like through a 4 hour game session or 5 hour game session and be
Right.
fun as heck, right?
Yep.
And so you learn to cut corners and speed play through your D&D. And it's interesting because it was designed that way. It
Yeah.
was designed for epic play where you just get so like I just remember like our weekend game sessions, we had it down. And they even had like SOPs, it's just like they come to the door and they wouldn't even role play it. They just standard SOP. It's like, okay, the thief goes to the door, he listens to the door, he reports back what's going on. Um, fighter number 5 kicks the door in. This is the movement order. The wizard's in the second rank with a spell prepared. The elf is back there with bow ready. I mean, it was like, so we would just steamroll dungeons and
Yeah.
if it was an interesting encounter, then we do the play acting stuff, right? But if it was just like we need to get in there and just like smash and grab, we get in there and smash and grab. And so there was sort of that sort of it was like a raid, like we're SEAL team in the underworld in medieval times, and we're just going to go in there, get the job done, and get out. And there's also the fear of wandering monsters. So like once you get beat up, you want to get out of there before you're too beat up because you could run into a purple worm on your way out of the dungeon, and it's just going
Right.
to wipe out half the party, right?
Right.
um yeah, it's just, I don't know, different ways to play. I don't want to get into the whole
Yeah.
mine is better.
So
I just
I have a question for you. After you finished Tonnisburg and this book was
Yeah,
published,
yeah.
did you run it for anybody from the Blackmore bunch?
I ran it the year we found it. The year we realized what it was, and we
Yeah.
had a full set of maps, which all have room descriptions. I started running it for Chris and all the other guys in the group.
What was their reaction to playing in this?
Well,
I mean,
Chris immediately,
they were fans of Blackmore, right? So like what was their reaction to playing in this Lost Dungeon?
well, most of our group at the time were actually new gamers and they'd never played.
Okay.
And so they were just kind of like, it was like, well, if you game with us, you're playing the original game. So they were kind of like, well, this is cool. We're with the guys that made Secrets of Blackmoor and we're playing old school, right? Chris, within, I don't know, 2 rooms of the first session, he was like, "You're running Tonnisborg. I can tell. It's too. The map's weird. We're playing OD&D, and I was like, yeah, and I was like to the group, I was like, okay, so you people are the first people. It's actually the list of names. I think I call them playtesters, but they were the first people to run into Tonnisborg in 35 years or more.
Yeah, so Jeremy, Michael, Chris Graves, Randall, Harper, Rosa, Rich Lopez, Paul Storm, Robert Welton. Yeah,
Yeah, like Rich Lopez and Jeremy, they're the Bards of Greyhawk. We
yeah,
game with the Bards of Greyhawk sometimes. They're fun.
cool.
Yeah. Like I've played in Rich's Hackmaster campaign a little bit, you
Yep.
know. For a while I was hanging out with him all the time. Just was some days didn't really work for me, so I had to stop.
So after you completed Tanasburg, that you just recently put out another book. Talk a little bit about the newer book.
Yeah, I'll talk about that. I feel like did I cover everything in Tonnisborg because I tend to spider out and
Yeah, I
get
mean,
lost.
I think so, and I think here's the other thing I would say, just endorsement wise. I think for anybody who's interested in the history and the old school kind of playing, I think it's a great example of that. And I think people can and should pick it up because again, I think for experienced DMs, it's a refreshing kind of approach to the old-fashioned dungeon crawl, but with a very different kind of vibe. And I think that you that imprint, like you said, that imprint of Blackmore on this, that's design style is very evident. And I think it's also a very replayable dungeon. Like it's not going to be something that you just run through in one session. This is meant to be something that could be revisited and, could scale to higher
It's
levels.
that, I mean, people use it now like it's a new term, but We've been using it forever. The whole living world concept of
Right.
an RPG. It's like you don't waste the dungeon and then it's just like empty, like somebody went in there with a broom and cleaned it out, you know.
Right.
It you leave and 2 weeks later you come back and there's new stuff there,
Yeah.
you
A
know, and
new.
new
Yeah.
puzzles and new problems, and
Yeah.
it's a campaign dungeon.
Right.
um
Right.
I wanted to add, like, even like Dan Boggs, the book contains an entire set of rules for playing dungeons. So it's and those are based on what was available at the time as like old drafts that have been discovered, and so it's kind of assembled from different ideas in drafts to create sort of a pre-publication D&D experience. And one of the things that we had in our group, we had a group of researchers. We call ourselves the the Northern Marches Historical Society is our joke name, and we're all like Blackmoor fans, and we're all into game history. But like Michael Kalea was the guy that had the he just was like, well, where did all the stuff from the trial between TSR and Dave Arneson end up? So it was Kalea who actually is one of the people who vetted the sort of the research, not sort of the, see, there I go, sort of. It is. He helped vet the research in Secrets of Blackmoor and make sure it was correct. Um, he was the one who went out and discovered this trove of stuff from the lawsuit that had been archived digitally, and he just downloaded. You know, he was asked for PDFs, and they sent it to him. So while there's a complete game in the book, there's like a rule system and everything in there, and even like a lot of DM advice if you don't know
Yeah.
how to play in the old way. And that's all, you know, take it or leave it. Um, there's the you can even go out and get the old rules, old rules. They exist out there. I should see whose has a copy because you can legally, it's just public domain stuff, and so people can share it. And I know that people are still sharing it. So you could get like a pre-publication copy of D&D from 1973, which is what Greg was running it with, right? And the exact same edition, I'm sure. And you could like literally play like it's 1973 and Dungeons and Dragons hasn't been
Yeah. I mean,
published.
in the span of like 28 pages, there's effectively just a super condensed player's handbook and a little bit of a dungeon master's guide
It's
in
free.
this book. It
You
it
can go
is.
on our website. It's a free, the players part of it.
Yeah.
We provide the player's handbook and the maps for playing the modernized maps as freebie downloads at tfott.com. You can go look at what the rules look like there.
Yeah.
Um, the other funny thing is people were kind of, the one thing they always commented on was there's a 10 by 10 foot room in Tonigsburg that has like, I'm trying to remember, it's like five wyverns in it, right? Well, if you read that edition that was discovered by Michael Kalea, the description for wyvern is a small dragon. Greg Svensson read that and he was like, well, they're small. I can put five of them in a 10 by 10 foot room, you know?
Yeah.
And of course, later they adjusted all that with the monster manual. They got into all the details. Until the monster manual came out, we didn't know how big half the stuff was anyway, you know?
Yeah.
Playing D&D was kind of like the Spinal Tap, you know, the Stone and Engine Spinal Tap. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's proportionally this size. Okay.
Yep. That's so let's go back to the other book. So the more recent
Oh yeah,
book.
I gotta go. Woo, this is another one. This was just, we had so much stuff, and we went to Arnicon. We ran our game convention, so I could talk about Arnicon. I mean, there's not a lot to say. It's a game convention, but really, it's more just like a big gamer pizza party, and it's kind
So
of a
talk
great.
if we're gonna jump to Arnicon, then you got to tell us where like what is the
Oh,
fellowship of the thing?
the
Because
Fellowship. Okay, so I'll talk about that, and then I can talk about this because
yeah.
this came out of Arnicon.
Okay.
Fellowship of the Thing is was our original company that was supposed to do like a social media internet thing, kind of mixing like social media with like well, it was more like about how the database was structured. I have a different way to structure my databases and stuff. And so and how to evaluate the meaning and value of things instead of like, I like it. Um, and so we did, our company is the name, the fellowship, blah, 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 the fellowship of the thing is our company. And we did the movie. So we did Thomas Borg as part of the Kickstarter for the movie. And then we decided, because Chris and I are just about doing cool stuff and we just wander from project to project, like, let's do some of that. We'll do some of that. And so we thought, we'll do a game convention. So we started doing Arnicon, which we had wanted to start years ago, and then COVID happened, and we just had to cancel. And we wanted to do it coming out of COVID, but we just didn't have enough time to get it together. We've never done a convention, and we just didn't have the time. And also, like, whereas everybody else made a lot of money during COVID, we had the reverse effect in that it really suppressed our movie. Coming out of the last election, Amazon took all the independent documentaries off their platform. And they're kind of like the only platform. If you're an indie, you've got Amazon and you've got the other one that we're using, which is on our website. And the other one doesn't get as much traffic. So our sales were like, it was like, we made the movie, we're coming out the door. And suddenly all the doors shut on us and the movie just tanked. And I just think it's kind of funny now. But so we decided, like, let's just do a convention. So we did a convention, and I mean, I even used this, like, I used this book at the convention to run a game on the map. But I still have all the notes in it. I'm being rambly. I'm so sorry, Bill.
That's okay.
Anyway, so the end
So
result is
when
that
did you actually
we
start up Arnicon?
it was 2 years ago, so we're in 25. So subtract two, whereas in 23 was the first one.
Okay.
And it's kind of a response to Gary Con. And Gary Con is kind of like the big full blown super corporate thing, you know, like they sort of ignore a lot of things. And I don't know, it's just more, I don't want to say bad things about Gary Con. It's just really big. I don't like big. Okay. I like small and intimate conventions where you know everybody and you have fun. So we just ran, like I said, we're just running kind of a gamer pizza party in the Twin Cities. It's not very big, like 150 to 200 people. All the old gamers show up. Everybody runs all kinds of crazy stuff. There's really it. We don't stop anybody from running this or that game, but it seems to always end up that the games that are being run are kind of classic. You know, like, just somebody will be like, "Wow, if I run a game at Arnicon, like if I just dig out my old Traveler campaign and run an adventure at Arnicon, 10 people will show up to play.
Yeah.
I'll do that instead of trying to get my friends to play this antiquated game." Because
Right.
Arnicon people are just like, yeah, I'll play it. Is it old and weird? I'll play it, you know.
Yep.
And people also show up with new games that nobody knows about, and they run that. We have we're doing like an indie gamer table, like our sort of merchant area is Blackmoor Market, and but we're going to have an indie table, and so if you're an indie, I mean, don't go overboard. Bring a box of your product, and slide the box under the table, and you can leave a couple copies on the table. You go off and game, and maybe you'll sell a couple copies of your product, and you kind of offset your costs for coming to the convention, right? That's how we did it in the old days, apparently. So yeah, it's just a fun convention. And then so we ran the first convention, and I didn't expect this to happen. I showed up, and Ken Fletcher, who was really there from the beginning in a lot of ways, he worked at Dave Arneson's company, but he started gaming he was part of the sci-fi community, so he's a crossover, kind of like a Venn diagram, sort of sci-fi gaming. He played in one of the first games where Arneson tried to use non-standard stuff in a historical miniatures game, and that was the famous game where the druid in the I guess it would have been set in Britain. The game set in Britain. The druid in the game is wandering around, and he has a hand phaser, and the Romans go to like eliminate the druid, and the big war elephant comes marching up and disappears because the hand phaser just shot it. And of course, the game ended, and Pete Gaylord, who was the Romans, threw a tantrum and left. He kicked everybody out of his house. It was in his basement. But anyway, Ken was there for like, kind of like the first non-standard game they played. Um, and so he had all this stuff, and he showed up at Arnicon, and he was just like, Griff, I got this stuff like this. I'm pretty sure Ken thinks Dave drew this. Dave gave it to him. And this is like a multi-panel map of Blackmoor.
Wow.
Yeah. And so
Wow.
there's everything except for like one corner map, which would have been where the Egg of Coot was. I don't know if it didn't get drawn or got lost, but it would be easy to reproduce that. Um, yeah, we get all this stuff like that. We have so much, it's hard to organize it, to publish it. And I just kind of like rushed to publish a book. It took about, I think I wrote this one in, I don't know, maybe 4 months, 5 months, something like that. And that's including like all the layout, all the other stuff.
So how would you describe that book? Is it kind of just history or is it a gaming book? Like how would you describe uh
It's complicated because Blackmoor is so, when you play about Blackmoor, you aren't just playing D&D. You're going to the roots of the system, of the game. And
right,
so most Blackmoor players have this real sense of the historicity of what they're doing,
right.
you know. And so it's kind of resources for a homebrew Blackmoor campaign would be the
Okay.
best way to describe it
So
because
it's, for let's say, I have somebody who's really interested in diving into this. That book could be a great resource if they want to learn more about the setting of Blackmoor and some of the history, and then to develop their own campaign based in the Blackmoor world.
yeah, I mean, it's so much is here. And then you kind of, I mean, there's stuff where Dave Arneson, he would do these like session write-ups, which is something that comes out of wargaming, is like
Yeah,
battle reports, their
yeah,
session reports. And so he's got these session write-ups, which some of them are really hard to date, but he talks about the things his players were doing. And they seem a little bit goofy because they're like, there's you can't go to the monster manual to get in, the stats for the monster. You don't even have a list of monsters you can use. You gotta just invent everything and put it in your dungeon. And he invented the dungeon too. And so you can kind of get the flavor of what he was doing. I mean, I upgrade it, you should upgrade it and just modernize it. But it reveals the play style he's using, which is very much like I tell you what it's like, you tell me what you do. Um, and then you've got these maps in here, which are I'm running Blackmoor, and there are other maps out there. Like you can get the map that was in First Fantasy Campaign, and you can get a copy of First Fantasy Campaign, and that's an okay map. But really, all they did was they took Dave Arneson's one of his early maps, which is I guess it would be this one here. They took this one, right? I can't tell if I'm on camera because there's a bar over the image of me.
there you go.
Okay, so they took this one and they just exploded it and added a little bit more around the edges to create a
Right,
bigger map. Most of the like there are a lot of places in Blackmoor that were intended as like off map places, and so
right.
like you meet people that represent these factions that are off map, but it's sort of this magical place over there. You never go there, right? And so I've been running my Blackmoor campaign for years just with that little map out of the um, out of that out of the book. I mean, the scans come from me. I had a scan. I use that, but it's in the book. And then there are updated maps. Like if you look through this one, I think Ken Fletcher drew this. So there's like an upgraded 1985, I think is the when it was created map. And so you've got like the town of Blackmoor there. You can use that, if you want to do a town of Blackmoor. Um, we're planning on, we have access to the dungeon. We're just kind of like talking to the person who has it, but the estate wants to publish the dungeon. And so there is a version of the dungeon that Dave created, like around about 85 or so. So, and then we have an upgraded map, which would be like Blackmoor, or like the town of Blackmoor 50 years later, that was drawn by another guy that was like helping develop Blackmoor before Dave passed away and had worked on, I think he had worked on some of the DA modules. So we have pieces of the the missing DA5, basically, which would be the town, the dungeon, and maybe a world map. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a good book if you're into D&D history. It's got stuff that might be interesting to you if you want to run a Blackmoor campaign. I mean, it's definitely an interesting, if you're developing a campaign, it's kind of interesting to read through it since it is sequential and see how the very first RPG campaign evolved. Because I think that a lot of DMs, and this is again what we were talking about earlier with young DMs, they're assaulted by all this consumer stuff that's telling them this is the only way and our product is the only product, right? And
Right.
it's like, no, you just need pencil and paper and imagination. You can do whatever you want. And so and I did it in my own campaign. I wanted to change my campaign. I just changed it, right? Like my players weren't yet in Blackmoor. I was just kind of starting out. They were just doing some dungeon dives. And I just moved them to Blackmoor. And I was like, okay, world has changed. Won't really explain much. It's just going to be better. And they were like, okay, right? It's like, yeah, I made the back map better. So I threw it, we're not going to use that crappy map. I got this new map. Here you go. Who's going to complain? It's an elf game.
Yeah.
It's not real.
Yeah.
I'm your dungeon master. I'm trying to improve your game and I've changed it.
Yeah.
And I do that with the rules too. Like some weeks I'd be like, well, I'm trying a new thing. So when you do this one thing, you got to roll this die to do that, right? And I'll do that for a session and then I'll be like, nah, it didn't work. Okay, we're going back to the old way, guys. Um, and so in a sense, you're Rob Coons talks about that. Like a dungeon master is a game designer. And so when you learn a dungeon master, you learn game design through playing D and D. And so, which is probably why people are so like, argumentative because they know so much about game design. They're like, no, that's not the way you do it. But you learn game design. And so if you're running a campaign, it's never fixed in stone. You're always prototyping. And all if you look at all the stuff, it's like the first three big dungeon masters are Dave Arneson, Gary Gygax, and Phil Barker of Empire of the Puddle Throne. They all published games. By the time their games were published, their personal rules were totally different for their own campaigns. They was like, yeah, that was great, but that was like a year ago. I'm going this way.
Right.
And none of them use their own games. And it's like really the games are just you just get look and feel out of them.
Well, we're in the closing segment. So this is the part that you really wanted to do
Yeah.
because when I first reached out to you, you're like, yeah, I could talk about the movie and I could talk about the books, but I really
Really
just
didn't
want
want
to
to.
talk DM stuff. So let's talk about imposter syndrome. That was one of the things that you brought up. So
Oh yeah.
years and years of playing
Well,
and gaming and background and all this stuff, and yet sometimes as we're cultivating these things, we get these moments where we start to doubt if we are in fact, worthy or authoritative
yeah,
enough to do what
yeah.
we're doing.
Well, it's
What's
the
your
I'm
take
not
on that?
worthy, Spinal
Yeah.
Tap is like the guide to life, I think. But everybody has that I'm not worthy moment where you just like I'm an idiot, right?
Yeah.
But I'd like to go back further because it was kind of funny because I was at a convention and I ran a game for a bunch of people. And when I ran the game, see, I'm supposed to be like the guy that is totally confident. I did Secrets of Blackmoor. I've been a DM for 50 years or whatever. Not quite 50, but getting close. Um, I know what I'm doing. Well, I was in a room full of, it was this weird little tiny convention, and almost everybody there was a dungeon master. And I would say half the people there were game designers. And I sat down to run a game for everybody, and I went into imposter syndrome.
Hmm.
And I had to force my way through a game session, and I hated every second of it because I just felt like I was an idiot because I was surrounded by all these geniuses, you know. And I mean, it happens to everybody at one point or another. It's embarrassing to talk about,
No,
you
but
know.
but I think that it's one of the reasons why I brought this in was not just because you mentioned it, but because I think it's a very common thing, and especially now in this, renaissance of tabletop role-playing games where we also have role-playing games as media where people are watching people play games. And I mean, the biggest example is Critical Role, but there's so many shows
Yeah,
of
yeah.
actual plays where it's literally people just watch other groups play games and are
It's a and it's a
engaged in
perf
it.
and it's a perf like when you see social media or when you see RPG media,
Right.
you're seeing people acting like people. They're not people. They're not all. I won't say always that they aren't this. They're not always like actually people playing a game. They are often people acting like people playing a game,
Right.
and so it puts this veneer of perfection over it all. And they're all charming and they're all actors. They gotta, it looks natural. I mean, you work in media.
Yeah. I
There's
mean,
a
I do
there's
it.
a
I
there's
make these,
You're right.
but
There's a
but I know what you're
well,
saying.
look here.
There's a
Here's what
difference.
happens when I do this. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right.
wait a minute. I thought Griff was in his study, and it's like, no, this is the office building, and we just
Yeah.
made a cut. Like, here's the movie set.
Yeah.
It's like things start to fall apart when you go past the edge of the
Right.
screen. And I just did that. I'm probably gonna lose all the viewers on my YouTube channel, but
But
they're gonna
no,
be
but I
like,
mean
he's faking it. He's not really in his room.
the whole concept of like your example at a convention, I think that does happen, whether it's a convention or
Yeah.
if you're just running a game for like a new group of people, or if you're running a game at a game store. And sometimes you have these moments where you realize that the players are just as competent or more competent than you are, and you start to kind of sweat, and it sort of inflicts this bit of anxiety.
Well, and it's not that it's like, RPGs aren't a competitive sport, right? They
Right.
shouldn't. I mean, like, I think there are groups out there that are sort of getting into the idea of like sort of implementing some of Wesley's ideas in their games. And so they don't understand that Wesley's point isn't necessarily for it to be competitive either. But they're really into this idea of like D&D being like a war game and having this sort of like head-to-head combat, which it works, but it also can really ruin the fun and people's feelings get hurt.
Yeah.
The idea, at least within the original D&D, was that you're competing sort of indirectly with the dungeon master.
Yeah.
And so there's a barrier. The dice and the pre-generated stuff or pre-created stuff creates the barrier of safety.
Yeah.
And the DM is a little bit of facilitator. You're
Yeah.
playing against the DM's ideas that are there.
Right.
Sorry, I'm ranting and
No, I mean,
yeah, I don't
so
know. The culture has just changed so much. Good, Eli,
and
go on.
well, so I was gonna kind of follow up with that. I think that the imposter syndrome thing is something that people do run into under many different situations, even just with your home group sometimes. I think a DM can fall into this trap of feeling like they're over their head, or the players know stuff better than they do, or whatever it might be.
Right. Well, I guess
But
that's what I was trying to say about the competition aspect. I mean,
yeah,
part of what drew me to it was that when I was younger, although I played competitive games, a lot of times I found it difficult to play competitive games because I just wanted the enjoyment of being with a friend, right?
right.
And playing a game together. And so D&D, for the first time you had this game that you could play and all the players were together, and the dungeon master isn't the competition. So when you screw up, it's not like the dungeon master is like, ha ha, I got you.
Mhm.
It's like, or when you do well, it's not like the dungeon master is like, you jerks, you ruined my fun.
Right.
That's not, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just feel like the removing that it isn't in that it isn't fully in the culture of RPGs, and so you're creating that, like, back to what we were talking about originally. You're creating that feeling of not being adequate within yourself. I just wanted to take it back to when we first met because I ran that game that night and I sort of knew you, but we weren't really friends yet. So I sort of knew your face, and
We
I think
we
you were seated across from me.
Yeah, well, so to set the stage,
Yeah,
that was, first of all, it was the
it was the
headlining
last
game. It was the last game of the night,
Saturday night. Yeah.
and it was, I'm not joking, 14 people were at that table. You were running a game for 14 people, and each one of us had two or three characters,
You each
something
had at
like
least
that.
two characters. Yeah.
At least two characters. So
I'm running a party of Yeah, I don't know if it's 14, even if it was just 12, it's
No,
still
I know it was
24
14.
PCs.
I
You
know it
took
was 14
pictures.
because I took notes that night, and I remember my mind being blown that you were taking on that huge, number of people.
Yeah.
And it was,
Artisan used to run 20.
well, yeah, but I mean, but so to set the stage though, because I think a lot of people who follow my channel might not be from that era and might be like, holy shit, 14 people.
If
But
with two
in the old
characters each,
days,
yeah.
in the old days,
20.
having a table of 10 or 12 people was like normal.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and
yeah,
so to set the stage, there's that many people around this massive rectangle. And I do recall I was seated across from you. You laid out everything, that the narrative began. We started the dungeon crawl. And I think the first time that we got into combat, everybody's rolling initiative. And I just started calling out, like, what your numbers are. And I wrote them down.
yeah.
And I think that other people don't realize that was a player's job. That there was at the table back in the day, there was a player's job. You were the caller. You were the person who kept track of initiative so that the DM could focus on running the game. And you didn't even ask me to do it. I just did it. And then, I that kept it,
Well, it was funny because it was like, see, you're an experienced gamer and you played for a long time and you just did it, right?
right,
And normally, like, I have to train people when I go to conventions on how to play D and like this is how you play D and
right,
D, right?
right.
It's not in it's mentioned in the book, but there's a certain thing that goes on. And so that's what I was going to say was like you were sitting across the table from me and I watched you grab a piece of paper. I think you were handling the movement order.
Yeah.
Did you have the
I
Yeah,
had
so
the
you
marching order. I had the marching order in the initiative, and then two of the other guys were mapping. That was the other thing, is that
um
the two of the
I don't
older
think I did
guys.
initiative. I'm a parallel initiative guy.
So I took the notes on the initiative, and then you would look up and say, like, all right, who's up next? And I would call out who was next.
Oh, okay, okay.
And and
Yeah.
and and then two of the other guys who were probably around my age were mapping.
Yeah, we had two mappers, so we had
And
a backup system.
right. And the funny thing is the further we went into the dungeon, the more convoluted our maps became, and the party was lost, which is really,
You're
sort of
exploring an
realistic.
underworld.
Right.
Yeah.
Sort of realistic. Like, oh shit, we're back. Wait, which way did we go? And and so that experience to me, I mean, it's funny that you're referencing that as almost an imposter syndrome thing because there were so many people there who were
I
DMs.
just felt like an idiot because I was surrounded by like these great guys. Like Wenger Satanis,
Yeah,
regardless of his politics, which are opposing to mine in a lot of ways.
right.
Um, I love him dearly. Like he is just a beautiful, wonderful person.
Yeah,
But he's also like a hardcore gamer. So I got Wenger on the at the table. I've got Goss at the table, who's
yeah.
probably one of the
Goswick, yeah, Judd.
yeah, Goswick.
Yeah,
Judd Goswick, yeah.
yeah,
He's probably one of the best DMs I've ever like I think he's the best DM I've ever played
yeah,
with. So he's at the table.
yep.
I'm looking around the table. I got you. It's just like crushing, like I'm gonna get judged, you know? And so my experience was like, I remember waking up the next day and I was just like outside having a smoke in front of the hotel. And you come out, I think you were the first person I talked to, and I was like, oh man, I hope that game was okay. I feel like I really sucked, you know? And you guys, like it's such a small convention. Half the convention went to have breakfast together.
Yeah,
You know, it's really just, it's another pizza party convention that's
right.
awesome.
Yeah,
And, and so you were like, no, dude, we just all had breakfast and we were all talking about how freaking amazing that was. And I
yeah.
was just like, really?
Oh,
You
yeah. And
know,
and it's, when you were mentioning describing how doors open in or out, that
yeah,
was that was one of those little
it was an
things.
important component.
Yes, because I vividly remember one of the rooms where we
The
put
snakes.
ourselves, yeah, we put ourselves into a position where we got, into basically a murder hole in a hallway where we couldn't get out or in. So you got your allies behind you, your allies in front of you, and snakes are just, and knowing which way the doors opened and closed mattered because ultimately to save ourselves, we had to close those doors.
Yeah, you closed the door and the snakes were, because the group closed them, the snakes were pressing on the back and actually holding the door shut in the
Right,
jam. And
right.
it's like, that's what it said it was on the map. I didn't
Yep,
say they would do that, but it's like a bunch of dumb animals
yep.
lunging at you. We're going to. shut the door and shut it, you know.
Yeah. So I would just say
It
that,
saved your butts.
that was, it's funny that, we had different perspectives about that, but I've talked about that session now for several years in describing how to manage a big group because
I
I
didn't know
think
how to be a
most
DM back then. I've learned since then.
but like most I feel like most newer groups, number one, they don't have the same strategic sense that a lot of
Yeah,
older
yeah.
players have. And number two, they don't really understand their specific role in a group. So,
Hmm.
and it's so much of a team kind of group effort, that
Yeah,
you're everybody should have a role, and I think the very idea of a standard operating procedure, like as you referenced before, that was very common when we were growing up.
yeah,
Everybody knew
yeah.
their role, and you did dungeon crawls so much that you did have an SOP. And now they're just like, well, I just open the door. They don't even think about listening or checking for traps or anything like that. So
My
I
guys would
think,
write SDOP on the page, and it was like standard door opening procedure.
right, right.
And
And marching
that,
orders,
and so the
all that
marching
stuff.
orders and all that would be right below it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's an interesting thing to think about, but I would say that if for whatever my perspective counts for, I don't think that you had to have imposter syndrome because that was a great
yeah.
session and people still talk about it. So
I have an attitude where you will never be you will never be a good DM. You got to have that attitude. And
yeah,
it's not because you don't want to be a good DM. It's just that the minute you think you know what you're doing is when you become a crappy DM,
right,
right?
yeah, and
And
I
so
I
like
think
every session for me feels like I'm like literally like it's like the guy trying to land the airplane on the aircraft carrier with one wing missing. I go into every game session feeling like that. Like I don't know what I'm going to do. I got notes, I've got stuff, but I could just crash and burn in the ocean. And there are a lot of times when I do, like the players are kind of like, whatever, you know.
yeah.
Griff pulled a bad game session. It's like, I know, but last week it was freaking amazing, you know.
Yeah,
But
no, I think there's some truth in that, not being too prideful so that you can still always be learning from your own successes and mistakes and improving your game because yeah, I agree. Like the minute that you think you're top dog, you're not working on your game anymore. So I agree with that philosophy too.
you notice how
You
excited
know,
I am talking about this? Like all the other stuff I did in other interviews, and I just wanted to get together with you and talk about being a DM and
yeah.
like go into this because like this is what I've wanted to do with you for like years now. Since I ran that game, I've wanted to have a session with you like this.
Well,
And now
so
that we're like to it, I'm like, we've got 3 more hours, right? I'm like all energized and like,
maybe I might
"Wah!"
have to cut this up into a multi-part episode,
Yeah.
but
Well, we should do another show, but
yeah,
no, but the thing was like we were sitting outside and I asked you like, did it suck, you know? And then I asked you like, am I a good, you know, like I don't remember I don't remember what I asked you or how I asked it, but you kind of gave me a look of like, Griff, are you just trying to like get me to like pat your back and tell you you're a good person or like you're a good DM? And it's like, no, no, no. I want to do like like a debrief because I want to, you know, like I want to know what was good and I want to know what was bad
right,
so I can like have feedback because the biggest problem for DMs is that your players often don't tell you what they want out of the game or else they'll
right.
use weird verbiage
Yeah.
that doesn't actually mean what they said to you. And I was just curious like did I, you know, yes, did I pull off an enjoyable session? Okay, what did you guys like? And then was, you know, please be critical. Like there had to be some suckiness there. Tell me what the suckage was so I can focus on fixing the suckage. Because the good stuff is kind of like, okay, I covered that well.
Right,
I'm good enough over here.
right,
The bad stuff is like, how can I eliminate suckage? And it's sort of like learning to play chess, you know, learning you learn the good moves, but you want to know what you're doing that's suckage that you seem to do over and over, you
right.
know. And the more you remove suckage, the better your game gets, you know.
Well, and I think that kind of segues to a connected follow-up question thread that I had.
Yeah.
which is, in talking about that, you mentioned one important trait of a DM, which is the willingness to get feedback and to learn and improve. But I had a question that I thought would be a good prompt for us to talk about, which is, what would you say are the most important traits for a DM to have to practice or to develop? And that's certainly what you mentioned is one of those things, right? Being
Yeah.
willing to learn from your mistakes and your successes and to get feedback. What are some other traits that you feel maybe you've cultivated or that you're still working on or that newer DMs could benefit from trying to practice?
I think that there's like, well, because we're doing our own show now. Chris and I get together,
Yeah,
and we not even, like, I mean, I notice other shows like if you got stuff going on, you don't do a show. You're not like chasing the algorithm, and
right.
it's just like I just get on there and talk to my friends through YouTube, right?
Yep,
And that's kind of our attitude. And so we do watch other people's YouTube videos, and one of the things that I despise when I watch YouTube videos is that it's either like the 5 traits of a great dungeon master
right,
or the 5 traits of a terrible dungeon master, right?
right,
And it's like, it's not, people think things are formulaic and that, like, I'm going to give you a shopping list and you're going to get all the ingredients and then you're going to go home and you're going to make the perfect dungeon master,
right,
right?
right,
You can't bake the perfect dungeon master. Um, because the game is so fluid and different. It's like when people talk about, like, yeah, I planned all this stuff. I was going to do all this stuff. My players showed up and they went over here, and I don't have anything for that area. And I had to wing it all night long. And it was grueling, but they loved it. But it was 4 hours of I have no idea what's out here, you know. And or they just hit it with a fireball and destroy, like, that was supposed to be, the guy was supposed to give you the clue that leads you to the enchanted skull in the castle, and he fireballed him to death. Okay. So I kind of feel the same way about going on, deviating all over the place. I feel the same way. I get so excited when it comes to like actually talking about D&D stuff. Um, I feel like there just isn't, you have to figure out who you are as a person, kind of. I mean, it's kind of like D&D is so weird because it's like kind of like going to therapy or something. It's like, okay, I'm not good at these things. I can do that a little bit. How about I just don't do that? Like I am not good at voices. I can do 2 voices. Okay. Me, and then something that sounds kind of like Festus from Gunsmoke. Okay. I can fake, I can sound like I come from Italy and I talk
yeah,
in an accent like this. I can do that, but I'm not an actor. Excuse me. Um, and so I just don't do voices. And we're playing last game session. Chris was acting out a character. He did it in his own voice, but it's not like but he didn't do and the leader says, and then he says what the leader says in like a third person. It was just like, I'm really glad you came. We've needed help, and he didn't even act. It wasn't even like that. He just said what, like if you lived in that world, a person in that world would sound like you. They don't sound like some crazy Renfester speaking in some weird, fake, old English accent. Like if you were speaking old English, I wouldn't even understand what you're saying. It's a whole other language.
right.
And so I just try to get away from the whole like faux Renfester thing. I just hate it, you
Yeah.
know.
I think there's a
But that's
fascinating
me.
thing with American role players whose characters, for whatever reason, always have a British accent. And I think because it's the classic, you know, Renaissance fair vibe, right? But like I find it
It's
funny
because you
because I'm
can't.
like, why do we always do that as Americans? We always adopt the our interpretation of our ancient overlords' accents. Like
Well, I can tell you why.
why
It's
don't
because,
people play their
well,
D&D games with Italian accents or German accents?
I was doing a lot of reading on Italian Renaissance last night, and I was thinking this very same thing. And I was like, yeah, it's because the Italian Renaissance isn't written as much on
Right.
as like in the English language, right? If you're Italian, there's probably crap tons of stuff about Italian Renaissance, like the history and the wars and all that, and the mythology in Italian for Italians. But we don't have a way to access that
Right.
because we're English speaking. And so I was reading about the Renaissance in Italy because it's just so fascinating with all the like mercenary armies and crap. It's equally as interesting as British history,
Yeah.
but in a different way.
Yeah.
It's like and in sort of a very conniving, money grubbing way, which is different from British history. You know, I mean, I think it's the Italians that invented banking. Like you can blame them for all the loans that you have to pay interest on because
Yeah. And yet
freaking Italians.
it's I think it's a gold mine of if you wanted to add more like political intrigue into your campaign, the
The
Italian
hill
side of
towns,
the
yeah, all the hill towns and small city states.
yes. Yeah. Like it's
And
cool. It's a gold mine.
yeah, and then you got the whole pressure of like the Pope,
Right.
which is kind of weird because like if you're doing like a if you've got like a lot of deities and stuff, it's kind of hard to have the Pope, but
Yeah.
you can have several popes, and
Yeah.
but they have a lot of weight. It's like they represent the gods. And
So accents don't so much matter. What are some things that as a DM,
well, I don't think it's an issue of see, it's not a fixation on that doesn't matter.
right.
That doesn't matter for me.
Yeah.
If you're like I was talking to Ronan Wong, he's a professional actor.
Right.
He's another drop. He's going to be at Arnicon. You got the guy from the Man in the High Castle there, who's
Right.
an actor, and he'll be your DM.
Yeah.
Well, when Ronan runs a game, he's like totally comfortable in being goofy, different characters.
Sure.
So he'll give you like that sort of like critical role style game, right? Well, he should just like amp that up because he's good at it, and people will want to play with him because they get that experience. I shouldn't do it because I'm going to do it badly, and people will be like, "You suck." Right.
Right.
And
Right.
so I think as a DM, you have to find the aspects that you're good at and focus on those. Part of why maybe part of why I'm not like a super crunchyroll DM is because I am an idiot. I'm like kind of really heavily ADHD and whatever brain dysfunction stuff. Like I read stuff and you know I like scanning the internet. I'm just like and like oh wait, I rearranged the words and not really saying what they said, you know. And so I'm better off with like easier rules where I can just focus on my like big story stuff, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think it's just a matter of finding what you are good at and what you enjoy and enhancing that and sort of like just if there's stuff you don't do well, just skim it. Like I don't know, even like when I was younger, I would fudge some things. Like if there was a monster die roll, right? I don't feel like I don't feel like running a bunch of were rats and having a conversation with the party as a were rat tonight. You ran into 8 orcs. The players never know. It's a random monster. It really doesn't matter if it's this or that. It's like I just don't feel like role playing that whole scene. I hate that word scene. I don't feel like role playing that whole encounter as a were rat. Um, I'd rather just like have it be skeletons or orcs and just move on,
But I
and that's
think you
okay.
I think you hit on I think you kind of hit on the answer to this question, which is there is no right answer, that
Mm-mm.
each individual DM needs to kind of think about what their interests and what their strengths are, and then try to make those what they emphasize when they're running the game versus trying to be someone else.
Yeah, like you can't be Matt Mercer.
Right.
I will
So,
never be Matt Mercer, but I run a kick-ass game from what people tell me,
yeah.
but it's not like his game. It's
Right.
different, and
Yeah.
he can't be me, you
Right.
know. And
And I think you nailed it with that. I think the key is just, find your individual strengths and your interests and incorporate those things into your game. And you'll naturally evolve towards your strengths. And that will help your game to kind of shine.
I mean, I think that there's all this sort of tribalism and factionalism in RPGs, right?
Oh yeah.
And so like, I mean, we talk to each other on social media, and
Yeah.
it's like sometimes I'll be like, I love OD&D, and like somebody will be like, yeah, but what about Axe? And I'll be like, yeah, I would never run that, right? And I'm not saying I'm not saying I won't play Axe. If there's a good dungeon master that can run Axe for me,
Sure.
I'm there. Like that's great. It's just not the right system for me to be the dungeon master, right? Or referee
Right.
or whatever. And then by the same token, it's not like I'm saying, I hate you know,
Right.
Macros, I hate Macros, like no. It's his game. It's kind of his evolved home system. He even talks about that.
Right.
And so it's like if I could sit down and game with him as the dungeon master, I'd be like, oh my God, that's so cool. And so I think that kind of also plays back into the old, it doesn't have to be old. It plays back into the classic RPG format of role playing,
Yeah.
which is you play a lot of games with your friends, you find a game system that you like, you create a setting or adapt a setting to what you want, and then everybody in the group has a different world. And when you get together to play, it's a different experience. It's not homogenous and boring. It's like we're playing, I don't know. Griff's running. We know he's fair, but he's a bit brutal. Bill's running. I don't know what your style is because I haven't played with you, but Bill always likes to play elves, whatever. I don't know. It's like it's always elves with Pizza World when you're
Yeah.
with Bill,
Right.
or whatever. But like you create flavors for all the different campaigns, and it becomes this sort of personalized thing. And that's another thing that I mean, I'm publishing books, right? I want you to buy my books, but I'm not telling you that my product is how you should think and is the only way to play. I'm like, if it looks interesting to you, buy it. It might enhance your game, right? But the big companies are like, you know, it's it's either you got buy Pepsi or you buy Coke. There's no like you can switcheroo,
Right.
and maybe I want root beer. I don't know, but there's definitely you know it's hanging out with. I know I keep talking about Rob Kuntz, but it's just like I like hearing the old stories from people who were between groups. I also mentioned the other people, but Rob talked about like, yeah, we were all a bunch of hippies, right? And they're like kind of these weird anti-establishment hippie guys that are making this game. Now they're in charge of a corporation. They got to convince people that their corporation produces the thing that replaces all other things in existence so they can get all the money, right?
Yeah.
Of course, Rob bailed out when it kind of got to that before it got to that point.
Yeah.
But that's what happens. I'm kind of transitional from like hippie to punk thing into goth or whatever. But it's always like you don't have to be, like you don't have to be a sort of like victim consumerist that must buy everything. It's like, there's some things that are useful. Get them,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, and I think that that's an important point, not just for your products, but for I think a lot of different games. I mean, behind me are books that I have just skimmed through and I've never played, but I've maybe used them for influences, right? Like, or
Right,
I've taken little
references.
morsels here and there and incorporated them into stuff. And that's not only is it okay, I think it's a wise thing to do because it expands your perspective on games or on game content or on world building or even just like sometimes it's even just smaller elements that influence you. Like,
Hmm.
you know, so I think that's a really important point as well.
Yeah.
And it speaks to so I did have a question that was it's a lighter question, not so deep, but I think it
You
connects
didn't
to this.
answer my question about how badly I screwed up my game at that convention, though. I
I
was
don't
like,
think you screwed it up at all. I think
okay.
considering you had 14 people at a table and that game went from 8 p.m. until after midnight, I think that was pretty incredible.
Oh, really?
We didn't
Wow.
finish until 12:45.
No kidding.
Yeah, that was a
I had
long
no
fucking
idea.
game. And also half the people by the time we sat down at that table were already hammered because
Oh,
at dinner
yeah, a lot
they
of
had a bunch of
drinking.
drinks. So
Yeah.
I mean it was a
And the
pretty
drinks were coming in the room while the
yeah
game was going, and they were
yeah.
going, yeah, it was a
So
fun
yeah,
game.
it was I was impressed, man. I was actually very impressed that you managed to get us through even as much as we got through with that big of a group. So uh
Yeah.
yeah,
It
I
was
mean I
fun. I mean, Matt, what is his? is it the Fourth Watch, his show? Like all
Matty,
these
yeah, Lord Mattius, yeah, he was
Lord
there.
Mattius,
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Judd, Venger, all like a whole bunch of the people that were at VengerCon too were there, and like I said, I've referenced that game in terms of teamwork, dungeon design, mapping, like working as a group multiple times because it had been a really long time since I had
Right,
played any edition that old,
yeah.
and to assume those roles and to be playing through that kind of dungeon.
The team play by the players, and then that merging with the team play with the DM to make it
Right.
happen is kind of like, yeah, it's cool.
That's the
I don't
sauce,
know.
man. That's the
Yeah, I think
sauce.
so. That's why I went
Um,
back to it,
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the other people who are doing their own game systems have gone back to basics, literally, like in terms of stripping down, things to the core so that it's not crunchy, so that it's rules light and it just allows or facilitates the game to just flow without, somebody having to take 10 minutes to look up what their different feats in combination with their spells and their stuff is going to do. Like, just get on with the game.
Yeah, it's just like we don't know what I don't know. We'll look it up after the game session and
Right,
correct it if we can. But
right.
right now, the DM says that, this is what happens and we just go, yeah.
Okay. Next question. It's relevant, but it's also lighthearted.
But you still
How
haven't told me how sucky I was. Go on.
I said you didn't suck. I
But I
swear. I'm
can't
not.
learn. Like you got to tell. Something
Okay,
sucked.
here.
Go
You
on.
want feedback? Here.
Yeah.
If I was you in that situation and 14 people wanted to play, I would have said, all right, listen, I'm not doing 14 people. It's
Oh,
8 o'clock at night. I'm already two old fashions into the night. Eight
I
of
was
you can
pretty
play in this
tanked.
game, and I'll run
Yeah.
another session the next day. That's what I
Yeah.
would have done. But
Yeah.
that notwithstanding, that's the only feedback I would say is just
Okay.
because
All
what
right.
happens is you have that massive of a group, just like in the old days. I grew up playing with the neighborhood kids and inevitably it would be in someone's basement because none of the moms wanted us to play on their nice dining room tables. So we'd be in
Right.
a basement with a shitty folding card table to roll dice on.
Or a ping
People would
pong
be
table.
sitting anywhere on the floor, on bean bags,
Yeah.
leaning up against the crappy 70s wood paneling on the red shag carpet. And we'd have 10 or 12 kids in this basement, and we'd get through maybe 3 rooms in a dungeon because it'd take forever to get through the rounds with all those people.
All your descriptions of the shittiness is kind of bringing a tear to my eye. Oh, it's just,
That's,
oh,
I
wonderful
know, right?
times.
So yeah,
Go on.
those,
Yeah.
those were years and years of my youth growing up playing
Yeah.
games like that, and I think I have gravitated towards smaller groups. Now, do I still run big tables? Yeah, I can, but I think 5 to 6 is my sweet spot because it allows us to move quick. That's my only feedback, and that's my personal take on it. But
I just got used to it. I'm running 14 at Arnicon into Xenopus Dungeon.
yeah,
Like I looked at my sign up list, which is 14 players. I left it big, and in case someone wants to play,
right,
it's packed.
right. Well, and I would say this too, I'd add
Mm,
this caveat. I think 10, 12, 14 players works if you're playing OD&D, or another very rules light system.
yeah.
But I don't think you could do that nowadays with like D&D 3, 4, 5.
No,
Couldn't.
no.
There's no fucking way you could do that because
Imagine a Pathfinder battle where
right,
you've
or
got like
Pathfinder, any of those games
20
have a, a
player
bunch of
characters.
feats and proficiencies and all that other shit. It's just going to slow it way
It's
down.
a
So,
nightmare, yeah. Well,
but
that
if
was
you're
kind of the design feature of the later systems is that everybody wanted to have special powers, and in order to
right,
have special powers in the older system, you would have to have multiple characters, right?
right,
And so what they did was they buffed the characters into these superhero characters that are really like the equivalent of like a fourth level multi-class character
yes,
from old, or like four characters rolled into one from old D&D. If you like that, that's fine.
right, right,
But I like that like you run into something and it's big. It probably does 3 dice of damage every time it hits. I've got one hit die.
yeah,
I'm running.
right. Right.
Anyway, go on.
That's a principle
Sorry,
of
I'm interrupting
survival.
you.
Run away. And there's
Yeah.
too many dumb new players who don't understand that running away is a free option to choose from, and you should choose it more often. Here's my lighthearted question. In no
Yeah.
particular order, what are three of the best tabletop role-playing games that you have ever played or run?
It's weird because I don't know if it's the system or it's
Do you want
I
to know my
mean,
follow-up question? What's more important in a tabletop RPG, the mechanics or the narrative?
well, I was gonna go there. I was literally gonna go there.
But
Okay.
let's wrap
We
this up
played my first I
with
remember
your
my
top
first
three
time.
games with a short explanation of why. How about that?
Yeah, it's hard to that's hard to know. I mean, I'm just like I'm a huge fanatic of the Empire of the Petal Throne setting. It's
Okay.
freaking weird. If I tell somebody that plays EPT a lot that they're in the dungeon and they smell cinnamon, everybody's going to be crapping their pants and going like, "We're out of here."
Yeah.
And if
But
you don't play EPT, you don't know that cinnamon means that the Sioux showed up and they're like the nastiest monsters, just weird alien creatures, and they're going to mess you up. And it's really just better to leave, right?
right.
So, Empire of the Petal Throne, I've got an original copy sitting back there. I won't get off camera to grab it. I always talk about it. That obviously playing that is an incredible joy if you like weird. I have several systems. I mean, like even original Traveler, we played it some when I was a kid. It's kind of crappy,
Yeah.
but it was the only thing we had.
Yeah.
And so I have this warm spot for original Traveler that it's kind of crappy, you know. I'm just gonna say, like, as a rule set, it's got a lot of things missing.
Would you say that Traveler was crunchy? Was it very rules heavy?
Well, the big problem is that they don't have anything fun to do. I always wanted to do like an exploration campaign,
Yeah.
but it seemed like every time I played Traveler, and which is hilarious because Mark Miller is like a very he's very Christian and a very nice man, you know.
Yeah.
And so he wouldn't do these things. But in Traveler, you just end up doing things that are criminal. And so we'd always be like, you go to this planet and you're going to like break in and steal this crap, or you're going to do this,
Yeah.
or you're going to kidnap. It was always like this military operation.
Yeah.
And it was always like, it always seemed to feel a little bit criminal what we were doing. I wanted something a little bit more Star Trek, like you're on the edges of the Empire and you're meeting alien races and you're like,
Right.
doing the cool stuff,
Yeah.
what I think is cool stuff. So it never did that. So that's like kind of like a I love it and I hate it sort of
Yeah.
old game. I don't know. I mean, there's like I remember playing my Call of Cthulhu. My friend he came up with a scenario to run at a convention, and so we played it. I think it was even just solo, me and him, just to kind of test it. I got to the end situation and he's describing this like great old one coming up out of the earth pulls apart and it's coming out and I'm like, right. And I can't think of anything to do. And I'm like, you know what? I'm jumping into the chasm. Right. I had free agency. I
Yeah.
could have tried to run away and I was like, this is too weird for me. I have no idea what to do. I'm going to jump into the chasm and kill myself and become one with whatever it is. Right.
Mhm.
And he was like, yes,
Yeah.
like you won the scenario.
Yeah.
And then he ran it and like he had a problem there because somebody fulfilled most of the criteria, but another player played it incredibly. And I was like, yeah, you got to give the win to the guy that fulfilled the criteria, but the other guy is the guy I want a game with.
Right.
So Call of Cthulhu is also fun that way. Trying to think what other games. There's just so many games. It's like
So I
that's why
like
I
that
talk.
you picked you picked Call of Cthulhu, because you mentioned that earlier, and Traveler and Empire of the Petal Throne. Do you feel like it's not the mechanics, it's more the nostalgia and the stories and the narratives and the
The
games that you
setting
guys
is
played?
just freaking weird on those.
Yeah, setting. Okay.
Yeah, setting is always so that goes with your next question. You don't even have to ask it, but it's like, you look at Traveler, it is kind of the first sci-fi thing we've got, even though D&D is like it's coded into the system in D&D, but it's
Sure.
hidden. Traveler is like full on sci-fi. Um, and Empire of the Petal Throne, Call of Cthulhu is yeah. I'm the other one that you said three, but I'm the one that I just adored when it came out because it was so. I'm always looking for something different. Is the Whispering Vault? And it's weird because that guy sort of got canceled for I don't know why. Maybe he did a Kickstarter that didn't succeed or whatever. And and everybody was like, "We hate you." And it's like, you know what? The problem is that it's so easy to do a Kickstarter, especially early on, and promise all these things. And then you get to the end and it's like you and no one else, and you've got to like figure out how to fulfill it.
Right.
And then you realize you're up a creek without a paddle and you spent the money and I mean, that's Kickstarter wasn't meant as a shopping mall. It was meant as I'm going to give somebody $5 and help him do his thing. And he's going to, hopefully at the end, he will actually get it done and I'll get something out of it. But really what it was about originally was I'm just going to help somebody out and boost their dream. Right. And it turned into a pre-sales site, which is not what it was intended to be.
Right.
So when people complain, they're like, and they throw tantrums. I'm like, dude, it's right in there in the contracts and stuff. Like there are no promises. You're backing something and hoping that you're going to help somebody do something wonderful. And anyway, so Whispering Vault, freaking amazing game concept. Maybe now it seems dated because it was like kind of grim, dark sort of fantasy setting and
Yeah.
it sort of merged the idea of like sort of being a superhero type character with Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
So instead of Call of Cthulhu, where you run into the bad guys and you just keep rolling dice until you go insane and everybody's like, you know, in the corner in a fetal position, and that's the end of the scenario.
Right.
And like nothing you have works against these things. Like you shoot them with guns, dynamite, whatever. It doesn't matter. You can't get them. Um, um, on the other hand, when you play Whispering Vault, what you are is a person who, in real life, as a person, fought evil. And because you fought evil and were like an exceptional person, when you die, you are bestowed this like eternal life and you become a hunter of these evil things and you're helping like you're like an angel.
Okay.
And and so all of your characters are just freaking weird characters and you have a domain, like you talk about your domain that you come from because everybody has their own little magic world they make. And like one guy in our game, the DM asked him what he was and he was like what his world looked like and he was like, well, I'm sitting leaning against a wall on the ground and there's a crack in the wall and there's like a beam of light coming down into my eye and that's all that there is in my world. It's just like, and it was just like so dark and like, like kind of like Rorschach in that comic book series
Yeah.
they made into a
Watchmen.
movie that
Yeah.
was into the Blue Penis movie. But like it's very dark like that, and your job is to save the. See, it's like you get to be sort of an evil thing but you're like a twisted angel, and then you come to Earth and you fight. Like part of the game is that the humans shouldn't know that there is this alternate reality, real reality. It's kind of like the Matrix sort of
Yep.
idea.
Well, Griff, thank you very much for coming on the show, and for sharing your insights, your many years of insights into gaming and game design, as well as some of the information about your journey through documentary filmmaking and writing and creating games. Hopefully, we'll have some follow-up talks on future episodes. Until then, this has been Behind the Book with Bill, my guest, Griffith Morgan. Thanks for watching.
Well, hello, and welcome to Bill Allen World. I am Wizzy, the Wizard. I'm back once again to remind you to subscribe and click on the notifications button, and also watch videos that are over there. tune in to the next episode of whatever show you were just watching and watch other shows featuring Bill. He made me say that because he's a narcissist. Okay, bye.